Sit still a while. Nothing in the next 3 hours will ask you to sit up again. I was a poor man for a long stretch of years, and I was poor while carrying a finished method for the accumulation of riches. The method was not at fault. The man carrying it was furnished wrong on the inside, and success does not recognize a man by what he is carrying. I could set the whole of that method out on a table for another man, and watch him take it up and prosper by it inside 2 years, and then go home to rooms I could barely pay for. Not a season of bad luck. Years of it. There was a room in me that had a tenant already sitting in it, and every plan I made was shown to that tenant first. Most of them were refused before they ever reached daylight. I did not know there was a tenant. I thought I was looking at the world. What follows is 3 hours of moving that tenant out, one small piece at a time. You do not have to agree with any of it tonight. You do not have to remember it. Let it run. What sits in the room while you are not looking? There is a room in every man, and it is never empty. That is the first thing to settle, because most people believe the opposite. They believe there is a neutral condition, a plain, unfurnished state, and that a man decides from it. There is no such condition. The room is occupied at every hour of your life, and it has been occupied since before you had the words to notice. Something is sitting in it now, while you are lying still, and it will still be sitting there in the morning when you make your first decision of the day. You may find out who it is by a simple test, and the test does not require any honesty about your intentions, which is why it works. Do not ask what you want. Ask what you expect. A man will tell you he wants a fortune and expect a bill he cannot meet, and it is the expectation that is running the house. The tenant is not your opinion of yourself. Opinions are cheap, and they change with company. The tenant is the thing that decides, before you are aware of deciding, which possibilities are worth the trouble of examining, and which are dismissed so fast you never see them go by. I have set this down before, and I will set it down again. Your circumstances are not being built by what you say about yourself. They are being built by what has been living in that room long enough to be trusted. You did not sign a lease. It was there when you arrived, and you have been paying for it since, and the payments have been quiet enough that you have called them by other names. Bad timing, hard conditions, the way things are. The order you never remember giving. The subconscious mind takes orders. It does not weigh them. It does not check whether an order is in your interest, and it will not refuse one that ruins you, because refusal is not among the things it does. What it does is act on what is handed to it repeatedly, and with feeling. That is the whole of its instruction, repetition and feeling. Nothing else gets through, and nothing that has those two attached to it fails to get through. Now consider the orders you have given, without knowing that you were giving them. A man says 20 times in a year that he is not the sort who gets the good openings. He does not think he is issuing an instruction. He thinks he is stating a fact he has observed. But there was no fact. There was a sentence, felt as true, said often, and then a mind that went out and made arrangements so that the sentence would stop being a lie. That is not a punishment. It is obedience. I know how this sounds to a practical man, and I would not ask you to accept it as a matter of belief. Take it as a matter of watching. Watch what you say about yourself in the ordinary way, with no one important listening, and then look at the shape of your affairs, and see whether the two are strangers. The order was never given at a great moment. That is why it is hard to find. It was given while you were tired, or amused, or making conversation, or excusing yourself to a friend in a way that cost you nothing at the time. You may begin countermanding it tonight, not with a resolution, which is only a louder version of the same voice, with repetition and feeling, applied to a statement you have chosen deliberately, held long enough that the mind stops treating it as a visitor. Nothing you own was ever the point. I want to take away a comfortable idea and then hand back something better than the idea was. The comfortable idea is that a man is changed by acquisition. He gets the sum, or the position, or the house, and afterwards he is a different man. Everyone believes this quietly. It is the reason so much effort is put into arrival. It is not true, and the proof of it is a matter of public record and not of philosophy. Men who inherit large sums are frequently poor again inside a decade, and the sums did not shrink because of arithmetic. Men who are stripped to nothing in a panic are frequently whole again inside a decade, and the world did not hand them a second gift. Something in each of them was not touched by the money at all, and that something reasserted itself as soon as the conditions permitted. The tenant went with them. The tenant always goes with them. This is not a reason to think poorly of money. Money is a fine thing, and I have never pretended otherwise, and the man who calls it dirty is usually a man who has failed to earn any and has found a way to be proud of the failure. It is a reason to stop expecting the money to do work that only one thing can do. Acquisition does not install a tenant. It furnishes a house that a tenant is already living in, and it furnishes it in that tenant's taste. Which is why I am not going to spend these hours on schemes for getting. I am going to spend them on the occupant, because the occupant is what the getting will be handed to. The man already living at your address. Suppose a stranger had been living in your house for 30 years, and you had never once seen him, and every letter that arrived was opened by him first. Some he passed to you, some he burned. He burned them so quickly and so quietly that you never learned there was anything to be burned, and you concluded, reasonably enough, that not many letters came. That is the honest situation. Opportunity is not as rare as people find it. It arrives in ordinary clothes, in the middle of an ordinary week, as a suggestion from a man you do not think much of, or a piece of work that pays badly and would teach you a great deal, or an introduction you would have to ask for. The stranger sorts it. He has one standard, and the standard is not whether the thing is good. The standard is whether the thing fits the man he believes lives here. Anything that fits comes through. Anything that would require a different sort of man is refused on your behalf, and you are told, in a feeling rather than a sentence, that it was not for you. You have felt that refusal. Everybody has. It comes as a small drop in interest. Precisely at the moment, a real chance is being examined, and it is so smooth that it passes for judgment. The work, then, is not to hunt harder for letters. The work is to change who is sorting them, and that is slower than a decision and faster than most men fear. It takes about as long as it takes to make anything a habit, which is to say it takes longer than a week and less time than you have already spent waiting. A room cannot be emptied, only furnished. Here is where most attempts break down, and they break down in the same place every time, so it is worth a few minutes to head it off. A man learns that the wrong tenant is in the room, and his instinct is eviction. He resolves to stop thinking the old way. He watches for the old thought, and puts it out whenever it appears. He works at this for some weeks, and finds that he is thinking about it more than he ever did before he started. He concludes that the method does not work on a man like him. What has actually happened is simpler. He has been standing in an empty room shouting at furniture, and nature will not permit an empty room. There is no interval in which the space stands vacant. Take a thing out, and something occupies the place before you have straightened up, and what occupies it will be whatever has the strongest habit behind it, which is the thing you just removed. That is why removal alone always returns you to where you began, and why the man who has tried it feels he has proved something about his own weakness. He has proved nothing about himself. He has demonstrated a law. The only way a tenant leaves is when another is moved in on top of him. Not instead of, on top of. You do not fight the old occupant at all. You give the room a new one, with repetition and with feeling, and you keep giving it, and the old one goes for want of a place to sit. So there is nothing in the next 3 hours that will ask you to stop thinking anything. That instruction has never once worked, and I will not waste your night with it. Everything here is furnishing. The ghost that wears the body for a costume. I want to open a subject carefully, and I want to say what I am claiming before I say anything else, because this material is easy to misuse, and men have hurt themselves with it. I am not going to tell you that illness is imaginary. It is not. Disease is real. It has causes that can be found, and a man who is ill should be attended by someone trained to attend him. Nothing in these hours is a substitute for that, and any man who tells you otherwise is selling something. What I am talking about is a different thing that lives next door to illness and is frequently mistaken for it. There is a fear of ill health that does its own damage, entirely apart from any disease, and it does the damage through the ordinary machinery of suggestion. The symptoms of that fear are not hard to list. A habit of speaking about the body more than any other subject. A close interest in the ailments of other people, and a readiness to try their remedies. Self-coddling, which is the practice of treating yourself as a man who cannot take much. And the use of a complaint to gain sympathy, which is the part nobody will admit to and almost everybody has done. The mind is at work on the body at all hours, and it works on the pictures it is given. Hand it a picture of a failing man, hourly, with feeling behind it, and you have used the same machinery that builds a fortune, and you have pointed it at your own health. That is the whole claim, and I will not extend it further. Nobody thinks himself into a broken bone, but a man can spend 20 years rehearsing an invalid and then wonder why the part fits so well. What the mind does with a symptom it is fond of. There is a question that costs nothing to ask, and that most men will not ask, and the reason they will not ask it is that they suspect the answer. The question is this: what would you lose if the trouble were gone tomorrow morning? For most complaints, the answer is nothing, and the question passes without incident. But there are complaints that carry an allowance with them, and the allowance is not always money. A man who is unwell is not expected to try. That is a real payment, and it is paid daily. He is not asked why the venture never started. He is not compared to men his age who went further. A hard question arrives at the edge of the family and turns back at the sight of him, and the turning back feels like kindness and works like a wall. I am not speaking of a fraud. I have never met a man who arranged this on purpose, and I would think poorly of anyone who used this idea to accuse the sick. The arrangement is made below the level where purposes are made, by a mind that is only doing what it always does, which is to keep whatever is being fed. But the arrangement can be looked at, and looking at it is nearly the whole of the cure. Ask what the trouble is buying. If it is buying nothing, you have lost a minute. If it is buying an excuse from a demand you are afraid of, you have found the thing itself, and it was never in the body at all. Then go and meet the demand in the smallest possible form, not the whole of it, the smallest piece of it that is real. A body that is no longer required to carry an argument will very often stop making it. The difference between being ill and being willing. Two men take the same diagnosis from the same physician, on the same afternoon, and walk out into the same street. The first goes home and rearranges his life around the sentence. Within a month, the sentence has become the largest fact about him. He introduces it early in conversation. His plans are amended to fit it, and then his hopes, and then, without any decision being taken, his opinion of what he is. The second goes home and does exactly what he is told by the man qualified to tell him, precisely and without argument. And then he goes on being a man with work to do, who also has this to attend to. The illness is a fact in his life. It is not the tenant in the room. The medicine is the same for both. The obedience to the physician is the same. I would not have you think I am comparing a careful man to a careless one, because the second man is frequently the more careful of the two. What differs is what was allowed to move into the room, and how quickly it was allowed to move in, and whether anything else was moved in beside it. Some men are given a hard word and keep working, and outlive the word by 20 years and never mention it again. Others are given a mild one and close down a whole life around it, while the trouble itself stays small. The lesson is not that the mind cures. Say that plainly to yourself, so you are not tempted later. The lesson is that a fact and a tendency are two different things, and only one of them is handed to you by another man. You may accept the fact entire, tonight, with both hands. You are not obliged to give it the room. When a complaint becomes a position in the world. I will close this subject with the bound on it, stated plainly, because the material above is the sort that a man can carry off in the wrong direction and do harm with. Nothing I have said gives you license to look at a sick man and decide he has arranged it. You do not know. I do not know. The machinery I have been laying out runs underneath the place where a man can see his own workings, and a thing that runs underneath cannot be read off another man's face from across a room. If you take this material and use it to be impatient with somebody who is suffering, you have not learned the principle. You have found a new way to be unkind, and you will have made yourself smaller in the process. The principle is for use on yourself. It is almost useless applied to anyone else, and it is cruel applied to anyone else out loud. There is one more thing to say, and it is the part that does the work. A complaint carried long enough stops being a report and becomes a position. That is to say, it stops reporting where a man is and begins to fix where he is. It gets written into the ordinary arrangements of his life. His friends learn it and stop asking. His family learns it and builds around it. He learns it himself, and hears it come out of his own mouth in the first 2 minutes of any new acquaintance. And by then, it is not an ailment, it is an office he holds. The strange part is that the office is often held by men whose bodies have been sound for years. The trouble that opened it has healed. The position remains, because a position is easier to keep than to resign, and because resigning it means walking back out into a world of ordinary expectation with nothing between you and it. If any of that is near the mark, you may begin the resignation the way you would begin anything else. Not with a speech. Nobody has to be told. Simply stop putting it in the first 2 minutes. Let 1 week of new acquaintance pass without the office being mentioned. You will find out very quickly whether you are holding it or it is holding you, and either answer is useful, and neither of them is a judgment on your character. The fear that guards what it is destroying. There is a fear that comes with love, and it does more damage to affection than any other single thing I have observed, and it is almost never recognized, because it wears the appearance of caring a great deal. It is the fear of losing the one you love. Everyone has felt some of it, and a small quantity is nothing more than the ordinary sign that you value somebody. That is not what I am speaking of. I am speaking of the state in which the fear has taken up residence, and from that room it begins to give orders. The orders are these: watch, check, ask again in a different way, notice who was mentioned twice, notice who was not mentioned at all, which is worse. Do not appear to be watching, because appearing to watch is undignified, so watch in a manner that can be denied afterwards. That is a great deal of labor, and it is all being performed in the service of a thing that is being worn out by the labor itself. Consider what the watched person experiences. Not accusation, which could be answered, something with no shape to it. A steady low weather of being measured. Nobody can prove innocence against a question that is never quite asked, and after some years of trying, the effort of being trusted becomes more tiring than the affection is worth, and something in them steps back a pace. Then the fear collects its evidence. Says, you see, there was distance, I was right to watch, and it never learns that the distance was manufactured by the watching, because the fear is not in the business of learning, it is in the business of being fed. Here is the plain fact underneath it. Nobody has ever been kept by being held tightly. Not once, in the whole record of the thing. People stay where they are glad to be, and they are glad to be where they are not being measured. The cure is not to care less, which is impossible and would be a poor sort of cure anyway. The cure is to put something else in the room, and the something else is the work of your own life, taken seriously enough to occupy you. A man with his hands full is not a suspicious man. He has not got the time, and, which matters more, he has not got the vacancy. Jealousy as a form of accounting. Jealousy is generally treated as a hot thing, a matter of temperament, and men excuse it in themselves on the ground that they are passionate by nature. It is not hot. Look at it closely, and you will find it is an accountant. It keeps books. It records what was given, and what was received, and what is outstanding, and it does this with a diligence the man would never apply to his own affairs. And like any set of books, it rests on a valuation, and the valuation is the whole trouble. A man keeps this kind of account only over property he believes may be taken from him, and he believes that only because, underneath everything he would say aloud, he holds that he is not sufficient to hold it on his own merits. That is the tenant speaking, not the wife, not the friend, not the rival who may or may not exist. The occupant of the room who has one standard, and whose standard says that a man of this sort does not keep good things for long. I have seen the accounting run in men who had by any outside measure nothing whatever to fear, and I have seen its absence in men who by the same measure had a good deal to fear. The books are not kept on the facts. They are kept on the valuation, and the valuation was set long before the person in question was ever met. Which is why the arguments never settle anything. Reassurance is entered in the books as a payment received, and payments received are consumed, and the balance opens again by the weekend. You cannot fill a hole by pouring into it if the hole is what is doing the pouring. There is only one way out of that ledger, and it is not through the other person. It is to raise the valuation of the man keeping it by the ordinary means, which is doing work you respect until you have some evidence you cannot argue with. A man who has evidence stops taking inventory, not because he has decided to be generous, because the books have nothing left to worry about, and an accountant, with nothing to count, closes the office and goes home. The suspicion that manufactures its own evidence. I want to set down the mechanism by which a suspicion arranges for itself to be proved, because a man who has seen it once can rarely be caught by it again. It begins with a possibility, which is harmless. It becomes a question, which is still harmless. Then the question is put to the mind at night, over and over, with feeling attached to it, and at that moment it stops being a question and becomes an instruction, because that is the only language the deeper mind reads. The instruction is not, find out whether this is true. The mind does not receive instructions of that shape. The instruction is, this is the case, and from then on the whole apparatus of attention is quietly reorganized to serve it. You will begin to notice confirmations. You will notice them because you are now built to notice them, and you will not notice the far greater number of ordinary moments that disprove the thing, because nothing in you is looking for those. A late arrival becomes significant. A quiet evening becomes significant. A perfectly cheerful remark about somebody else becomes significant, and the significance was not in any of them. Then comes the part that finishes it. You begin to behave as a man behaves who has been wronged, not in accusations, which would at least be honest and could be met, in the 100 small withdrawals of warmth that a man makes without deciding to make them. And the other party, who has done nothing, begins to feel a coldness they cannot account for, and being human, they cool in return, because affection that is met with suspicion does not stand there indefinitely, waiting to be readmitted. Now the evidence is real. It was made by the suspicion, on the suspicion's own instructions, and it will be produced as proof that the suspicion was justified all along. I do not offer this as a comfort. It is not comfortable. I offer it because it is the same law, running in a place where men do not expect to find laws, and the same law means the same remedy. Feed a different picture, with repetition and with feeling, and hold it longer than you think you should have to. The apparatus will reorganize itself around the new instruction exactly as obediently as it did around the old one. It has no preference. It never had one. What a man holds loosely, he holds longer. There is an old piece of advice about holding things loosely, and it is usually said in a tone that suggests you should care less about them, and said that way it is worthless. The principle underneath it is not about caring less. It is about the difference between holding a thing and gripping it, which is a difference in the man and not in the thing. A grip is what a man applies when he believes his hold is not otherwise secure. It is a compensation, and everything about it announces the belief it is compensating for. The other party may not be able to say what they feel, but they feel the announcement, and nobody is drawn toward a man who is broadcasting that he expects to be left. An easy hold announces something else. It says that the man is on good terms with his own life, that he is not being kept afloat by this arrangement, and that his affection is a thing he is giving, rather than a claim he is enforcing. That is an attractive quality in the plainest sense of the word. It draws. I would not have you mistake this for indifference, or for the pose of indifference, which is a thing young men adopt, and which fools no one for long. The pose is a grip too. It is simply a grip that has learned to hold its face still. The genuine article has a requirement, and the requirement is that the man have something of his own that he is not willing to trade. Work he takes seriously, a purpose that was his before this affection and would survive it. Standards he keeps whether or not anyone is watching him keep them. Then his warmth is a surplus and not a transaction, and people can feel the difference between the two across a table without a word being said. It is the same law again, worked in a place where it looks like a matter of the heart. The room decides. A man whose room is occupied by his own definite purpose has no vacancy for the fear of loss, and having no vacancy for it, he does not act it out, and not acting it out, he is very much easier to stay with. The age at which a man agrees to be finished. Somewhere in every life there is an afternoon on which a man agrees to be finished, and the remarkable thing about that afternoon is that nothing happens on it. No door closes. Nobody informs him. He does not fall ill, and he is not turned out of his position. He simply arrives, by a road of small concessions, at a settled understanding with himself that the part of his life, in which things begin, is behind him, and that what remains is maintenance. The agreement is sometimes signed at 40. It is sometimes signed at 32. I have met men of 70 who had plainly never signed it, and were still opening accounts. And I have met men of 35, in whom the ink was long dry. So the fear I am naming is badly named, because it is called the fear of old age, and it has very little to do with age. It is the fear of the diminishing of a man, and it does its work by persuading him to do the diminishing himself, in advance, on a schedule he sets. The symptoms are ordinary, and they pass for modesty. The habit of apologizing for years, as though a number were a fault. The phrase, at my age, used as a full stop where a plan was about to be. A slow withdrawal of ambition, presented to the family as having grown sensible, and, most costly of all, the settled belief that the openings of life are for other people now, which arranges the affairs so that they are. The tenant here is a man who is on his way out. Every plan brought to him is measured against how much time such a plan would need, and the measurement always comes back short, because a man who has agreed to be finished has decided in advance what the answer is. I am not going to tell you that years do not matter. They do. The body keeps its own accounts, and it is honest about them. And a man of 60 who trains as if he were 20 is a fool of a particular kind. What I am telling you is that the accounting is being done twice. Once by the body, honestly, and once by a tenant who has no information at all and issues verdicts anyway. The second accounting is the expensive one, and it is the only one you can dismiss tonight. Calendar years and the other kind. There are two kinds of years, and men persistently confuse them, which is why so much bad advice is given on this subject by people who mean well. The first kind is the sort you count. They pass at a fixed rate, they cannot be argued with, and there is nothing to be done about them except to keep the body in decent repair and be honest about what it will now bear. The second kind is not counted at all. It is measured in whether a man is still taking on things he cannot yet do. That is the whole of the measure, and it does not correlate with the first kind nearly as closely as the world assumes. A man who has not attempted anything unfamiliar in 11 years is old, whatever the register says, because the faculties that are not used are quietly withdrawn from service. A man who took up a hard new subject last spring, and is still bad at it, is young in the only sense that has ever affected an outcome. Now, this is not a sentiment. There is a mechanism under it, and the mechanism is worth stating plainly. Capability follows demand. A mind that is regularly required to do something it cannot do reorganizes itself to be able to do it, and it will perform this trick at almost any age, more slowly later on, but by no means unwillingly. A mind that is never required loses the capacity to be required, not through any punishment, but because nothing in nature is maintained at cost for no purpose. What is not used is dismantled, and the materials put to other work. That is not cruelty. That is housekeeping. So the man who protects himself from the humiliation of being a beginner is not conserving anything. He is placing his order for the decline he is afraid of, and it will be filled promptly and in full. I would have you notice that the protection always looks reasonable from inside. It never says, "I am afraid of looking foolish." It says, "That is for younger men," or "There is not the time now," or "I have earned a rest." Every one of those sentences may be true. Every one of them is also the exact form the order takes. The apology nobody ever asked you to make. Listen to how a man of years speaks about himself in company, and you will hear an apology running underneath it that nobody in the room requested. He mentions his age before anyone has inquired. He offers it as an explanation before there is anything to explain. He puts himself at the back of a conversation about the future on the ground that the future is other people's property now, and he does it lightly, with a small laugh, so that nobody will think he minds. He minds, and the room adjusts. That is the part he does not see. The room does not decide he is old. The room accepts the classification he has just handed out, because people generally accept a man's own account of himself, having no better information and no particular reason to argue. Then the classification begins to arrive back at him from outside. He is not asked. He is not considered. He is treated with the mild deference that men extend to somebody who has been placed on a shelf, and he takes it as confirmation of the very thing he announced, and never once suspects that he wrote the notice himself and posted it. I would ask you to do a small and entirely private experiment. For 1 week, do not mention your age to anybody, for any purpose, in any tone. Not as a joke, not as an excuse, not as modesty. If somebody else raises it, answer plainly and let it drop. You will find out something within a few days, and what you find out will not be about other people. You will discover how many times a day you were reaching for it, and what you were using it to get out of. That is all the experiment is for, not to make you pretend. There is nothing here about pretending to be younger than you are, which is undignified and which nobody is ever fooled by. It is about noticing an instrument you have been using, without knowing that it was in your hand. Set it down for a week, then decide whether you want it back. What the late years were actually for. I want to put something in the room now, because I have spent 3 units taking things out of it, and I told you at the beginning that an empty room does not stay empty. The later part of a life has a use, and the use is not maintenance, and it is not waiting. It is the only stretch in which a man possesses 2 things at once that he cannot possess together at any earlier point. The first is a stock of judgment that can only be bought with time. He has seen ventures fail and can tell you at what point they were already lost. He knows which enthusiasms burn out and which harden into something. He can read a man across a table in a way that no clever young man of 30 can be taught, because it is not cleverness, it is a file of instances. The second is a diminished need to be admired. That one is a genuine possession, and it is undervalued because it looks like a loss. A man who no longer requires the crowd's good opinion is free to do work of a kind that was closed to him earlier, when a portion of every decision was being spent on how the decision would look. Put those 2 together, and you have the portrait of a man in a strong position, not a weak one. The trouble is that the world has taught him to read the second as decline, and to keep the first to himself. The great instances are not rare, and they are not miracles. Men have begun the work they are remembered for, well past the age at which their neighbors had settled into the evening of things, and the record contains too many for it to be luck. What they had in common was not exceptional health or exceptional fortune. It was that they had never agreed to be finished, so no part of the machinery had been shut down and put under covers. Here is the thing to put in the room, and it is a plain sentence with no ornament on it. The years ahead are working years, not a remainder, not an epilogue. Working years, of a kind that were not available before, and they are the only ones in which you will have both the judgment and the freedom at the same time. The last ghost, and why it feeds on idleness. Of all the fears that visit a man, the fear of death is the one that men least like to have named, and it is the one that does the most work in the dark, precisely because it is not spoken of in the daylight. It is also the only one that rests on a certainty. Every other fear concerns something that may not happen. This one concerns something that will, and that fact makes the usual arguments useless. You cannot reassure a man out of it, because the thing he fears is true, and he knows it is true, and any comfort that pretends otherwise insults him. So I will not offer a reassurance. I will set out how the fear operates, which is more useful, and which is the only part a man has any authority over. The first thing to notice is when it comes. It does not come during work. It does not come in the middle of a difficult piece of business, or in the hour after a good day's effort. It comes in the quiet. It comes at 3 in the morning, and in the long empty Sunday, and in the period after a man has retired from his occupation and has not replaced it with anything. That is a clue, and it is the whole clue. This fear is a tenant of vacancies. It does not compete for a room that is occupied. It moves into the ones that are standing empty, and it moves in fast, because nature does not permit a vacancy to stand, and something has to be put there. The men in whom this fear has become an affliction are almost never the men with too much to do. They are the men who have run out of demand. The trouble is regularly diagnosed as morbidity of temperament, and it is nothing of the kind. It is an unoccupied mind doing the only thing an unoccupied mind can do, which is to circle the largest fact within reach. That is why the remedy is not philosophical, or not chiefly. It is occupational. A man with a definite purpose that will outlast him is not free of the knowledge, but the knowledge has been given a smaller room to sit in, and it sits there quietly, instead of walking the house at night. There is more to say, and I will say it, but that is the load-bearing part, and if you take nothing else from this hour, take that the fear feeds on emptiness and starves on purpose. A fear that cannot be argued with, only crowded out. I have watched men attempt to reason themselves out of this one, and I have never once seen it done, and I think it is worth explaining why the attempt fails, so that you do not spend years on it, as many able men have. Reason operates on propositions. It can show a man that a particular fear is unfounded, and if the fear was resting on the proposition, the fear will let go. That is why reason is excellent against the fear of poverty, and quite good against the fear of criticism, both of which are built on estimates that can be shown to be wrong. This one is not built on an estimate. There is no error in it to correct. A man who fears death is not making a mistake about the facts, and when you demonstrate to him that his facts are correct, you have strengthened the thing you were trying to dissolve. The old teachers understood this better than the clever ones. They did not argue. They gave the mind something else to hold, and they gave it something large enough to be worth holding, and they were content to let the fear thin out from want of attention rather than from defeat. That is the operation, and it is the same operation as everything else in these hours. You do not empty, you furnish, and the furnishing here has to be of a particular size, because a small purpose will not do the work. A man cannot crowd out the largest fact in his life with an interest in something trivial. The trivial interest will be swallowed, and the fear will be sitting there afterwards, unmoved. What has served, in the men I have known who were genuinely at ease with it, was work with a beneficiary. Something being built or taught or set in order that is meant to be standing afterwards and to be of use to somebody who is not yet on the scene. It does not have to be grand. A trade handed on properly. A piece of land left better than it was found. A body of knowledge set down so that the next man does not have to buy it twice. The common quality is that the man's attention is pointed at something on the far side of himself, and a mind pointed outward is not available to circle inward. That is not a trick, and it is not a distraction. It is the correct use of the faculty. Energy changes its form and never its amount. I will set down one more thing on this subject, and then leave it, and I want to be honest about what kind of thing it is. There is a fact from the physical sciences that men of the last century established, and that has stood. Energy is not created, and it is not destroyed. It changes its form. Matter and energy pass back and forth between states, and nothing in the accounting is ever lost, however completely a thing appears to have gone. Burn a log, and it is not annihilated. It is dispersed into heat and gas and ash, every particle of it still present in the world, arranged differently. The form that was recognizable to you is gone. The substance is exactly where it was. Now, I am not going to tell you what this proves about a man, because it does not prove anything about a man, and anyone who tells you it does is going further than the fact will carry him. I have no more information on that question than you have, and I would think poorly of myself for pretending otherwise at this hour of the night. What I will say is narrower, and it is worth having. There is no instance anywhere in nature of a thing being simply cancelled. Everything that has occurred in the universe so far has been a change of arrangement. Whether that pattern extends to the thing that is presently reading these words is not a matter I can settle from the books, but a man who has taken the trouble to notice that nothing has ever been merely deleted will find that the fear sits differently in him afterwards, even without any conclusion having been reached. It becomes a question rather than a sentence, and a question is a great deal easier to live beside. That is all I claim for it. A question instead of a sentence. And a mind that is occupied with work meant to outlast it will not have much appetite for either. Let that one go now. It will keep. The word for changing one thing into another. Transmutation is an old word out of the laboratories, and it meant the changing of one element into another. The men who used it were chasing a thing that could not be done with metals, and the word came down to us slightly disgraced by their failure. It was the right word in the wrong department. What cannot be done with lead can be done, routinely and by ordinary people, with a state of mind, and the operation is so common that most men have performed it several times without noticing that they did. Here is the principle, stated flat. A strong emotion has a quantity of force in it, and that force is not attached to the object that provoked it. The force is yours. The object merely started it, and a force that is not attached to its object can be switched to another outlet, at which point it does work of an entirely different kind, at full strength. You have seen it done. A man is humiliated in public and goes home and does 11 hours of work he had been putting off for a year. Nothing has changed in his circumstances. The humiliation has not been resolved, forgiven, or explained. Its force has simply been taken off one line and put onto another, and the work got the whole of it. Now, that instance is accidental, and most men live their entire lives on the accidental version. The force arrives, and where it goes is decided by whatever course is nearest and best worn, which is usually a course that returns nothing. The principle only becomes an instrument when the switching is done deliberately. That is a skill, it is learnable, and it is the difference between a man who is at the mercy of what he feels and a man who is powered by it. I would have you notice what the principle does not say. It does not say the emotion is bad and should be got rid of. It says the emotion is fuel and is currently being burned in the wrong engine. Nothing here asks you to feel less. That instruction has never worked on anybody, and it wastes the one supply of power a man is issued without having to earn it. The furnace every man is issued at birth. The strongest of the natural desires is the one nature installed to continue the species, and it is the largest single reservoir of drive in a human being. That is a plain observation, and I will not spend the night being delicate about it, nor will I dwell on it, because dwelling on it is not the point, and would take us into a subject that does not need my help. What matters here is what it is made of. It is desire in its purest and most concentrated form. It produces, in a man in whom it is strong, a heightening of the imagination, an increase in courage, a willpower that does not have to be summoned, a persistence that outlasts obstacles, and a creative faculty that is simply not available to him in his ordinary condition. Every one of those is a business asset. Every one of them is what a man needs to build anything at all, and they are not produced by the object of the desire. They are produced by the state, and the state can be entered from more than one direction, and can be aimed in more than one direction once entered. That is the whole of the teaching, and it explains something that puzzles observers of successful men. The men who accomplish a great deal are very often men of strong appetite, and the moralists find this inconvenient, and the cynics find it amusing, and both of them miss what is actually going on. The accomplished man is not accomplished in spite of the force. He is accomplished because a portion of it has been switched, and the switching has given his work a quality of drive that a mild man cannot manufacture by effort. The man of the same strong nature who accomplishes nothing has not got less of the force. He has got the same amount, running out through an unaltered course, and it does its work there, and nothing is left over. Nature does not issue this equipment with instructions. It comes with a great deal of power, and no direction whatever, and the direction is the man's business, and most men never learn that direction is available to them at all. Why so many strong men were late starters? There is a fact in the record that men rarely stop to examine, and once examined it explains a good deal. Look at when men have done the work they are known for. In a very large number of cases, it is not in their 20s and not in their 30s. It is after 40, and often well after. This is true across trades that have nothing else in common, in business and in invention and in the arts, and it is regular enough that it wants an explanation. The usual explanation is judgment, and there is something in that. A man knows more at 50 and wastes less effort, but judgment alone does not account for the size of the difference, because plenty of men have judgment at 50 and produce nothing. Here is the other half of it. The great natural force is at its loudest in youth, and in youth it is almost never switched. It runs out along its own course, and it takes the imagination, and the courage, and the persistence with it, and the young man experiences these as things that visit him and depart rather than as instruments he holds. By the middle years the loudness has moderated, and a man has generally acquired some practice at not being commanded by every appetite that speaks. That combination is exactly what the switching requires. Enough force to be worth redirecting, and enough self-control to redirect it. So the late start is not a consolation for men who wasted their youth. It is a statement of when the machinery is generally ready. I would put one caution beside it. The moderation of the loudness is not itself an achievement, and a man who has simply grown tired has not accomplished anything. Plenty of men reach the middle years with the force banked down and no purpose to point it at, and they do not produce a late flowering, they produce a long gray stretch of evenings. The equipment being ready is not the same as the equipment being used. What decides is whether there is anything in the room worth aiming it at. The difference between suppression and redirection. Everything in this material can be got wrong in one particular way, and the wrong way is old and respectable and has ruined a great many decent men, so it is worth separating carefully. Suppression says the force is an enemy and must be reduced. It sets a man against a part of himself and calls the setting against a virtue, and it fails, invariably, for a reason that has nothing to do with morals and everything to do with mechanics. You cannot reduce a force by opposing it, because opposition is attention, and attention is feeding. The man who spends his evening not thinking about a thing has spent his evening on that thing. He has thought of nothing else. He has held the picture in front of his mind for 4 hours with a great deal of feeling attached, which is the exact procedure by which anything is impressed on the deeper mind. And then he wonders why the appetite is stronger at the end of the evening than it was at the beginning. It is stronger because he fed it carefully all night. The word he used while feeding it was resistance, but the deeper mind does not read words, it reads what is held and how strongly, and by that reading he spent the evening in devotion. Redirection does not mention the force at all. It takes the man's attention and puts it on a demanding piece of work, and it makes the work demanding enough that the whole of him is required. The force then runs to where the demand is, because force runs to demand, and there is nothing left over to be resisted, and the entire struggle he was preparing for simply does not occur. That is the practical difference, and you can test it in a week. Any man who has tried both knows which one leaves him tired and ashamed, and which one leaves him with something built. The rule underneath is the one this whole night is built on. You do not remove, you occupy. A thing with nowhere to go will go where it always went, and a thing with somewhere better to go will go there without being told twice. What happens to a force that is given no work? Let me follow the thing that is not switched, because men imagine it simply dissipates, and it does not. Force that is not spent on its own course and not switched to another does not disappear. It goes somewhere, and where it goes is worth knowing, because a man can then recognize the symptoms in himself and understand that he is looking at unemployed power rather than at a defect of character. It goes first into irritability. A man of banked force with nothing to do is short with people who have done nothing to deserve it, and he cannot account for it afterwards, and often apologizes without understanding what he is apologizing for. It goes into restlessness of the pointless kind. The evening spent moving from one small amusement to another without settling on any of them, ending later than intended and refreshing nobody. It goes into quarrels that are manufactured for the sake of having something to push against, and this one is the most costly, because the quarrels are with the people nearest, who are simply the ones within reach. And it goes, in the end, into a low dissatisfaction that attaches itself to whatever is at hand, so that the man believes he is unhappy about his position, or his town, or his marriage, when what is actually true is that a considerable engine is running in him with nothing connected to the shaft. I have some sympathy for men in this condition because they are generally told they should be content, which is the least useful thing that can be said to them. They are not discontented from ingratitude. They are discontented because a capacity is idle, and an idle capacity registers as a complaint against the nearest object. The remedy is not contentment, and it is not amusement. It is a demand. Something hard enough to require the whole of the man, held long enough that the engine finds the shaft. The lesson that was never meant to be sentimental. There is an old rule about doing to others as you would have them do to you, and it has been handled so often by people wanting to sound good that most practical men have filed it under sentiment and stopped examining it. That is a mistake, and it is an expensive one, because the rule is not sentiment. It is a statement about mechanism, and the man who understood it as mechanism gets a use out of it that the man who understands it as kindness never gets. Here is the mechanism. Every act you perform toward another person is performed first inside you. It has to be. Before you can be sharp with a man, you must produce the sharpness in yourself, and you must hold the state long enough to act it out. And in doing so, you have run the state through your own mind with feeling attached. The other man receives the act once. You have taken the whole treatment, at close range, with repetition, and repetition with feeling is the only instruction the deeper mind accepts. So a man who deals in contempt is impressing contempt on himself daily, and it will settle in the room, and after some years he will find that he is a person who expects to be treated with contempt, and he will not connect the two facts, because they arrived at opposite ends of his life. That is not a moral punishment. There is no bookkeeper in the sky adding up his offenses. It is the plainest sort of cause and effect, of the same kind that says a man who practices scales will get better at scales, and it operates whether or not he approves of it, and whether or not anybody ever finds out what he did. Which means the rule is not chiefly about the other person at all. The other person is affected, certainly, and that matters, but the principal party in the transaction, the one who takes the full dose every time, is the man performing the act. State it that way, and it stops being advice for pleasant people and becomes a piece of practical self-management for hard ones. What you do to another, you do first to yourself. I want to work the thing in the other direction, because the negative case is easier to state, and the positive case is where the value is. If contempt held with feeling installs a man who expects contempt, then the reverse operation is available and costs no more to perform. A man who deals fairly is not being noble. He is running fairness through his own mind several times a day, in the ordinary transactions that make up an occupation, with the feeling of it attached, and he is doing this year after year, without any special effort, because the acts are required by his work anyway. What settles in the room is a man who is dealt with fairly, and then something begins that looks like luck to anybody watching from outside. He is offered arrangements that other men are not offered, because people will extend terms to a man they are not obliged to watch. He is trusted with things early. He hears of matters before they are public, not because anyone is conspiring to help him, but because men repeat things in front of somebody they are easy with, and a man who has never once used what he heard against the man who said it becomes the person things are said in front of. None of that was the object. That is the important part. A man who deals fairly in order to be trusted is not dealing fairly, he is buying, and people can smell the purchase across a room, and the whole effect collapses. The returns come to the man who was not calculating them. I would put it this way, because it is honest, and it is the strongest form of it. The rule pays, and it only pays to men who are not keeping the account. Which is inconvenient for anybody wanting a technique, and it is nevertheless how the thing works. And the men I have observed to be genuinely prosperous over a long stretch of years have almost all been men who had stopped keeping that particular account somewhere early on and had forgotten they ever kept it. The only reason the rule is practical. There is one more turn in this, and it is the turn that makes the rule usable by a hard-headed man who is not interested in being good. The deeper mind cannot tell the difference between what you do to another and what is being done to you. That sounds like a large claim, so let me put it narrowly. When you hold a state of mind, the machinery that records it does not attach a label saying who the state was aimed at. It records the state. Envy held toward a neighbor is recorded as envy, and it settles as envy, and it colors what you expect for yourself, because the equipment has no facility for noting that the envy was supposed to be about somebody else. That is why the man who spends 10 years resenting the prosperous does not become prosperous, and it is not because the universe is punishing his attitude. It is because he has spent 10 years holding the state that accompanies not having, with feeling, daily, and that state has furnished his room, and now every plan he makes is shown to a tenant who knows for certain that prosperity belongs to other people. The reverse is equally mechanical and rather more cheerful. A man who is genuinely glad when somebody else does well is holding, in his own mind, the state that accompanies things going well, and he is holding it several times a week for free, and it costs him nothing, and he can do it for people he will never meet. That is not generosity of spirit, or it need not be. It can be adopted by a cold man on entirely selfish grounds, and it will work exactly as well, because the mechanism does not audit motives, it only records what was held. So take the old rule off the shelf, where the sentimentalists put it. It is a piece of equipment. It was always a piece of equipment. The men who wrote it down were not asking you to be nice. They were telling you how the apparatus behaves, and they said it in the plainest words available to them, and have been misheard ever since. The closed mind, and what it costs to keep. Tolerance is generally recommended, on the ground that it is decent, and that recommendation is true, and it is also the weakest argument available for it. The stronger argument is that intolerance is expensive, and that the man who holds a closed mind is paying for the privilege out of a fund he cannot afford to draw on. Consider what a fixed opinion actually does. It does not sit quietly. It performs a function, and the function is to reject information before that information can be examined. That is not an incidental effect. That is its entire purpose. A man does not hold an opinion firmly in order to keep looking at the subject. So the man with many fixed opinions has, in effect, hired a doorman who turns away a great deal of what arrives at the house, without troubling to find out what it was. Some of what is turned away is worthless. Some of it is the thing he has been needing for 11 years. And he never discovers the loss, because the loss consists of things he did not learn, and nobody can miss those. That is what makes this cause of failure so much more dangerous than the noisy ones. A man who drinks knows what he is doing to himself. A man with a closed mind experiences it as clarity. I would draw the line where it belongs, because I am not recommending that a man believe everything. A mind with no standards at all is not open. It is merely unfurnished, and it will be occupied by whoever spoke last and loudest. The distinction is between a conclusion and a gate. A conclusion is what a man has arrived at, and he can tell you what evidence brought him there and what evidence would move him. A gate is a position he arrived at without evidence, generally before the age of 20, generally by inheritance, and which he defends by never letting the question come up. Every man is carrying some of these. The useful exercise is not to root them all out in an evening, which cannot be done. It is to find one, this week, on a subject that actually bears on your affairs, and to open the gate long enough to look at what has been standing outside it. Prejudice, as a loan nobody remembers taking. Nearly every strong opinion a man holds was borrowed, and the borrowing occurred so early that he has forgotten the transaction and now experiences the opinion as something he worked out. Trace one back honestly, and you will generally find a room, a table, and a voice from before you were 12. The voice was certain about a class of people, or a line of work, or what men of your family are suited for, and what they are not. You did not evaluate it. Nobody evaluates at 9 years old. You took it in whole, in the way a child takes in a language, and the intake is permanent, unless something is done about it. That is the loan, and it is still being serviced, decades later, out of your own affairs, by a man who has no memory of signing anything. The costly ones are not the loud prejudices about the world. Those at least are visible, and a man can be argued with about them. The costly ones are the small inherited certainties about the borrower himself, because those never come up in conversation, and therefore never get tested. That men in this family do not go into business for themselves, that our sort does not deal well with money, that people like us should be careful about getting above ourselves, which is generally the most expensive sentence any child is ever handed, and it is handed with love, by somebody protecting him from a disappointment they suffered. Those sentences do not present themselves as opinions, they present themselves as the way things are, which is exactly how the tenant always speaks, because the tenant has no interest in being recognized as an opinion, and an opinion that were recognized could be examined and dismissed. Here is the test, and it is short. Take any settled belief you hold about your own limits, and ask when you first heard it, and in whose voice. If a face arrives with the answer, you have found a loan and not a fact, and you may begin the business of paying it off. Why opinion is the cheapest thing a man owns. Opinions cost nothing to acquire, nothing to hold and nothing to hand out, and men value them in exact proportion to how little they paid. Watch how they are traded. A man will give you his settled view on an industry he has never worked in, a country he has never visited, and the character of somebody he has met twice, and he will give you all three inside 10 minutes and at no charge, and he will be slightly offended if the goods are refused. Now watch what he does with the things that did cost him something. His trade, which took years. His judgment about the 2 or 3 matters he has genuinely studied. Those he offers carefully, with qualifications, and often only when asked. That is the honest ratio, and you can read a man by it. The more freely a view is dispensed, the less it costs to obtain, and the less it is worth to the man receiving it. I raise this for a practical reason, and not to be sour about human nature. The reason is that the opinions of the crowd are the chief instrument by which men are talked out of their own plans, and it is worth knowing exactly what those opinions are made of before you let one of them decide your life. Somebody will tell you the thing cannot be done. Ask yourself what that view cost him. In nearly every case, the answer is that it cost him nothing at all, that he formed it in the second before he said it, that he will not remember having said it by the weekend, and that he will bear no part of the consequences either way. You will bear all of them. That is not an argument for ignoring counsel, and the man who takes no advice is a fool of a different and more energetic kind. It is an argument for weighing counsel by what it costs the man giving it. Advice from somebody who has done the thing is worth a great deal and should be paid for if necessary. Advice from somebody who has merely thought about the thing for 4 seconds is worth what it cost, and what it cost was nothing. A man who moved millions without money or arms. There is an instance that ought to be studied by every man who believes he lacks the means to begin, and it is not usually studied at all, because it comes from outside the world of commerce, and men file it under politics and put it down. In India, there is a man who has assembled more practical influence than most heads of state possess, and he has assembled it without any of the instruments by which influence is ordinarily got. He has no fortune. He commands no army. He holds no office and draws no salary from any government. He owns, by all accounts, almost nothing at all, and he dresses in cloth he has had a hand in making. In the spring of 1930, he walked from an ashram at Sabarmati to the sea at Dandi, some 240 miles, to make salt, in defiance of the law that reserved its making to the government. He set out with 78 men. He arrived some 3 weeks later at the head of a crowd that could not be counted, and when he stooped and picked up salt from the shore, the act was repeated along the whole coast of the country by people who had never met him, and the authorities eventually arrested tens of thousands of them and were no further forward for it. Whatever a man thinks of the cause, and men are entitled to differ about the cause, the mechanism deserves attention on its own account. He had none of the things men say they are waiting for. No capital, no organization of the ordinary kind, no force, no permission. What he had was a purpose stated so definitely that a very large number of people could tell you exactly what it was in one sentence, and a life arranged so completely around it that nobody could seriously suggest he was in it for himself. That combination is the whole of the power, and it is available in a warehouse in Ohio as readily as on a road in Gujarat. I would have you take the narrow lesson and leave the rest. Definiteness plus consistency of conduct will assemble cooperation out of nothing, and it will do it faster than money will, because money buys attendance, and this buys belief, and men work differently under the two. Whoever can provoke you is employing you. Self-control is taught as a virtue, and it is better understood as a matter of ownership. And the ownership question is this: who is currently directing your attention and your effort? If a remark from a man you do not respect can take your afternoon, then that man has your afternoon. He did not have to pay for it. He did not even have to intend it. And in most cases, he has forgotten the remark and gone about his business while you are still working on it at 4 o'clock. That is employment. He set a task and you performed it, for nothing, and you will perform it again tomorrow if he sets it again. Look at the ledger of an ordinary week and see how much of it went out that way. A slight from somebody at work. A letter answered 3 times in the head before it was answered once on paper. A conversation rehearsed for an hour in which you at last said the thing you wished you had said, to a man who is not present and would not be moved by it. None of that produced anything. It was not rest, because it was work, and it was not work, because there is no product. It was the whole of a man's engine running against a load that pays no wage. Now, I am not going to tell you not to feel these things, because that is the suppression error, and we have already established what it costs. Feeling arrives on its own schedule, and it is not answerable to instruction. What can be instructed is the duration. There is a great difference between a man who is angry for 90 seconds and a man who is angry for 4 days, and the difference is not in the size of the provocation. It is in whether the state was fed after the first minute. The feeding is done by rehearsal. Play the scene again and you have topped it up. Play it 11 times and you will not sleep. Decline to play it, not by fighting it, but by putting your attention on something that requires you, and the state comes down on its own, because a state that is not rehearsed cannot sustain itself. That is the whole discipline, not the absence of anger, the refusal of the rehearsal. What anger actually purchases. It is worth being exact about what is bought with anger, because men spend a great deal of it under the impression that they are buying something. The usual belief is that anger is buying a correction. The man was wrong. The anger will register the wrongness, and something will be set right. Examine any instance you like, and see whether it turned out that way. In the ordinary case, the other party does not experience the anger as a correction. He experiences it as an attack, and the response to an attack is defense, and a man defending himself is the one man alive who cannot consider whether he was wrong. So the anger, aimed at producing a change of mind, has produced the single condition under which a change of mind is impossible. The second belief is that anger is buying respect. It occasionally buys compliance, in a man who has no choice, and compliance is a poor and temporary good that has to be renewed by further anger at rising cost. Respect is not among the things it has ever bought. Ask any man who has worked under a temper what he thought of its owner privately. The third belief is the honest one, and it is that anger is buying relief. That one is nearly true, and it is worth examining because it is where the habit lives. There is a discharge in it, and the discharge is real, and a man in a tight position with no other outlet will reach for it the way a tired man reaches for a stimulant. But it is a loan against tomorrow at a hard rate. The relief lasts an hour. The consequences of what was said last an appreciably longer time, and they are collected from the same man who took the loan, generally at the worst available moment. The practical instruction is not to be a mild man, and mildness is often only fear wearing better clothes. It is to know what you are buying at the moment of purchase. A man who says, in the second before he speaks, that he is about to spend a friendship for 90 seconds of relief, very often finds that he does not want the article at that price, and the whole transaction lapses for lack of a buyer. The man who is employed by his own moods. There is a condition that men do not think of as employment, and it is the condition of taking orders from a mood. A mood arrives in the morning without being sent for. It has no argument in it and no evidence behind it. It is a weather that has settled over the house, and by 9 o'clock the man is doing what the weather tells him. He postpones the difficult letter because the weather is heavy. He speaks shortly to a person who has done nothing, because the weather is heavy. He takes a small setback as confirmation of something large, because the weather is heavy, and the weather wants confirming. By evening he has arranged the whole day to agree with a feeling that arrived uninvited and will be gone by Thursday. I want to be careful here, because the instruction that follows is not the one men expect. The instruction is not that a mood should be fought. A mood fought is a mood attended to, and attention is the food it lives on, and the man who spends the morning wrestling his own low spirits has still given the morning to them. The instruction is that a mood may be left in the room without being obeyed. You may be flat and still write the letter. You may be sour and still speak civilly. And the civility is not a lie, because civility was never a report on your feelings. It was always a decision about another person. You may be discouraged at 8 and still do at 9 precisely what you would have done had you been in high spirits. And here is the part worth knowing. The doing very often ends the mood, when the arguing never did. The man who cannot do this is not lazy, and he is not weak. He has simply accepted an idea that nobody ever stated to him plainly, which is that action must wait upon feeling. It need not. It never did. The feeling is a passenger. It has bought no right to steer. Watch how differently two men treat the same gray morning. One says, "I am not in the humor for it," and the sentence sounds so reasonable that neither he nor anyone else questions it. The other says nothing at all, because he has stopped consulting the humor before beginning, and he is 3 hours into the work before the question of humor would have arisen. At the end of a year, the difference between those two men will be put down by other people to talent, or to luck, or to a difference in energy. It is none of those things. It is that one of them was employed by his moods, and the other kept his own hours. You are not obliged to be cheerful tonight. Cheerfulness is not the standard, and never was. You are only invited to notice that a feeling and an instruction are two different articles, and that you have been in the habit of confusing them. What a man says when he has nothing to prove. Listen sometime to a man who has nothing to prove, and then listen to a man who has a great deal to prove, and you will find that the difference is audible in under a minute. The man with something to prove speaks in a particular way. He tells you his position before you have asked for it. He mentions the people he knows, lightly, as though the mention were accidental. He corrects small errors that make no difference to anything. He cannot let a remark pass, and every remark that passes him uncorrected feels to him like a loss of ground. He is working very hard, and none of the work is going into his life. All of it is going into the impression. The other man is easy to mistake for a slow one. He lets a good deal pass. He does not compete for the last word, and does not seem to notice when it is taken from him. He will agree to be thought wrong on a small matter, rather than spend 20 minutes proving otherwise, because he has counted the 20 minutes, and finds them worth more than the point. He is not humble in the way the word is usually meant. He is simply spending his energy somewhere you cannot see. The reason this is worth an evening's attention is that the noisy habit is not vanity. That is the common reading, and it is wrong. It is fear, and it is a particular fear. The fear that if a man does not continually announce what he is, the world will settle on a smaller estimate, and he will be stuck with it. Notice what has happened. He has handed the estimate to the room. He has agreed that the room's opinion of him is the true one, and having agreed to that, he must now spend his life managing the opinion, which is an occupation with no wages and no end. Nothing sits so quietly in a man as a settled estimate of himself that was not issued by anybody else. It does not have to be defended because it was never in the room's keeping. It makes him restful to be with, which is a thing other men can feel without being able to name, and it is a large part of what is meant when a man is called impressive by people who cannot say why. Try this for 1 week and watch what it does to your temper. Let 3 things go past uncorrected, not important things. Let the small ones go, the misremembered dates and the slightly wrong figures, and the mild misjudgment of your part in some business. Say nothing. Notice the pull to speak and let it pass through you without acting on it. You will find at the end of that week that you are not diminished by 1 particle in the eyes of anyone, and that you are appreciably less tired. The first coin you were ever allowed to keep. I want to set the whole matter of saving on a different footing tonight, because the usual footing is a moral one, and the moral footing has never made a saver out of anybody. A man is told that thrift is a virtue. He agrees that thrift is a virtue in the way a man agrees to any statement he has no quarrel with, and he saves nothing, and he feels a small guilt about it, and the guilt is the entire result of the teaching. Set the virtue aside. It is not needed here. Here is what a reserve actually is. A reserve is a quantity of choice. That is all it is, and everything else said about savings is decoration on that one fact. A man with no reserve must accept the work that is offered on the terms it is offered. He must remain in the position he is in until another is found. He must take the first offer rather than the third, and the first offer is very seldom the best of the three. He cannot wait a fortnight, and the whole advantage in nearly every negotiation of a man's life belongs to the party who is able to wait a fortnight. He is not poor because he lacks money. He is poor because he lacks time, and money in reserve is simply time that has been stored where moths do not reach it. Now see the ordinary picture of a household. Two men earn the same figure. One of them lives at the exact edge of it, which is to say that his standard of living has risen to meet every raise he was ever given, quietly, within about 6 weeks of receiving it, without any decision ever being taken. The other lives a little below the edge, deliberately, and the space between his earnings and his living is not large. It is perhaps a 10th part. The first man is not enjoying his money more than the second. That is the illusion, and it is worth breaking. He is enjoying a slightly larger house and a slightly newer motor car, and he has grown accustomed to both within a season, so that the pleasure is spent and only the payments remain. What he does not have is the fortnight, and so, when the opportunity arrives that requires a fortnight, it arrives for a man who cannot take it, and he watches it go to someone he privately considers his inferior, and he calls it luck. Begin with an amount so small that no part of you objects to it. That is not a compromise. It is the whole method. A 10th is the figure the old teachers gave, and a 10th is sound, but a 20th that continues beats a 10th that is abandoned in March, and the object here is not the sum. The object is to become a man in whom a reserve is a habit rather than an intention. Why a man with a reserve is offered better work. There is a thing that happens to men who have put something by, and it happens for reasons that have very little to do with the money itself. A man carrying a reserve conducts himself differently in a room, and the difference is legible to everyone present, even though nobody could quote the evidence. He is not eager, that is the first mark of it. He listens to a proposal all the way to the end, instead of accepting it somewhere in the middle. He asks the question that might sink the arrangement, and he asks it early, because he is able to afford the answer. He does not laugh a moment too long at the wrong joke. When the terms are poor, he says, without heat and without apology, that they will not do, and he says it as a simple fact about the terms, rather than as a complaint about his treatment. Every one of those is a small thing. Together they announce to the other party that this man has somewhere else to be, and the announcement has an effect on the terms that no argument of his could have produced. Meanwhile, the anxious man has done the opposite of what he intended. He wanted the position badly, and the wanting was visible, and the wanting itself lowered the figure that was offered to him. He was charged, in effect, for his need. Every market that has ever existed charges a man for his need, and it does not do this out of cruelty. It does it because a need is information, and the market reads information. Here is the part I want to be exact about, because it would be easy to hear all this as an instruction to pretend. You cannot act the part. It has been tried by everyone, and it does not survive contact with a real negotiation, because the pretense has to hold for an hour under pressure, and it will crack in the 10th minute over some small thing. The ease is not a manner. It is a fact about the man's circumstances that his manner is reporting accurately, which is why the reserve does the work and the acting cannot. $200 put by does not sound like power, but it purchases the ability to say a true sentence without fear, and the ability to say a true sentence without fear is worth more in a negotiation than any skill I know of. So the money bought a position in a conversation, and the position bought better work, and the better work made more money, and men looking at the outcome will say that the fellow was fortunate in his opportunities. He was not. He arranged, some years earlier, to be a man who could refuse. The habit is not about the money at all. If a man has a reserve handed to him and no habit behind it, the reserve goes, and it goes in a period that can be predicted with some accuracy. You may see this in any family where money has arrived suddenly. It arrives, it is spent, and within a few years the household has returned to something very near its former circumstances, and everyone involved is surprised, and nobody should be. The money was never the operating part. The habit was. A habit of saving is a habit of doing a small thing that gives no pleasure at the moment of doing it, in favor of a self who is not yet present to thank you. That is a peculiar act when you look at it directly. It is the act of a man extending credit to his own future, on the strength of nothing but his estimate of that future's worth. Which is why men who think poorly of their own prospects cannot save, and why moralizing at them accomplishes nothing whatever. They are not weak in the way the moralist supposes. They are consistent. A man who does not believe there is anybody worth providing for in 5 years is behaving rationally when he spends the money on Friday, and until the belief about the 5 years is altered, the lecture on thrift is words falling on a settled position. So the order of the work is the reverse of what is usually taught. It does not begin with the money. It begins with the estimate. Set some small thing aside this week, and understand while you are doing it that the sum is not the point, and was never the point. The act is a statement, made privately, with nobody watching, that there is a man coming along in a few years whom you consider worth providing for. You will notice, if you keep it up for a season, that the statement begins to be believed by the part of you that does not listen to speeches. It cannot argue with the act. The act is evidence, and evidence of the plainest kind, and it is being submitted every week without a word being said. And a man who has come to believe there is somebody worth providing for begins, without further instruction, to conduct the rest of his affairs as though that were true. He treats his health as belonging to that man. He treats his reputation as an asset that man will inherit. He declines the arrangement that pays well this year and costs that man his good name. The reserve was never the object. The reserve is the receipt. What poverty does to a man's judgment. I want to say something about being short of money that is rarely said, and it is not about the discomfort. The discomfort is well understood. What is not understood is that being short of money makes a man decide badly, and that the bad deciding is not a fault in his character. It is a mechanical consequence, and it operates in men of the best judgment the moment their circumstances are tight enough. A man under money pressure has his attention taken up. Some part of his mind is occupied all day with a calculation that never finishes, and that part is therefore not available for the work in front of him. He is carrying the arithmetic into every room he enters. So he misses the thing he would ordinarily have seen. He reads the letter too quickly. He agrees to a clause he would have queried in an easier year. He takes the near-term relief over the far better arrangement that pays in 8 months. And he knows perfectly well which is the better arrangement. And he takes the other one, because 8 months is on the far side of a wall he cannot see over. Then, some years later, in easier circumstances, he looks back at that decision and calls himself a fool. He was not a fool. He was a man of ordinary sense, operating with most of his sense already spoken for. This matters tonight for one reason. It tells you when to make your important decisions, and it tells you that the reserve is not a comfort, but an instrument of thought. A man with a little put-by can look at 8 months. That is the whole of it. He can consider the third offer. He can decline the quick relief. He can let a poor arrangement go past him without his stomach turning over. His judgment is no better than the other man's. It is merely unoccupied, and unoccupied judgment is a different faculty altogether from judgment working under a load. And here is the turn that makes the whole business worth understanding, because it explains something that looks unjust and is not. Better decisions produce easier circumstances. Easier circumstances free the judgment. Freed judgment produces better decisions again. The thing compounds, in the same manner and at a similar rate to money itself, and it compounds in the other direction just as faithfully for the man whose attention is never free. Which is why the first small sum a man puts by is worth several times its face value, and why he should not despise it for being small. He is not buying goods with it. He is buying back a portion of his own attention, and there is nothing he could purchase at any price that would serve him better. Every setback arrives carrying something. I want to put a plain statement in front of you and then spend a little while making it useful, because in its plain form it is the sort of thing men nod at and never act on. Every setback arrives carrying the seed of an advantage of equal size. Now, said like that, it sounds like consolation, and consolation is a poor article at 2 in the morning. So let me take it apart, because it is not consolation. It is a working fact about how information reaches a man. A thing that succeeds tells you almost nothing. It closes over quietly, and you go on. You do not learn from it which part carried the weight and which part was decoration, because nothing was tested to the point of showing. A man may do the same successful thing for 11 years and understand it no better in the 11th year than in the first. A thing that fails is different in kind. It is the only report you will ever receive that is not flattering, and therefore the only one that is entirely accurate. It tells you exactly where the structure was thin, and it tells you at the one moment when you are attending closely enough to hear it. That is the seed. It is not a comfort, and it is not a promise about the future. It is information of a quality you cannot purchase. But a seed is not a harvest, and here is where men lose the whole of the value. The seed must be taken out at the time. It has a short season. In the days immediately after a failure, a man knows precisely what went wrong. He could name it in one sentence. 6 weeks later he cannot. And it is not that he has forgotten. It is that the account has been quietly revised. By then it was the market, or the partner, or the timing, or the fellow who did not do what he undertook to do. Every one of those may be perfectly true, and not one of them is of the smallest use, because none of them is a thing he governs. So the whole discipline of profiting by defeat comes down to a single act performed within the week. Sit down while it is still raw and write the part that was yours, not the part that was theirs, which is easy and warm and useless. The part that was yours, however small a fraction it was, because the small fraction that was yours is the entire portion of the affair you will ever be able to alter. A man who does that 4 or 5 times in a working life is not the same man as one who has never done it, and the difference will be visible in his judgment long before he can account for it himself. The difference between a defeat and a failure. There is a distinction here that is worth the whole hour, and men who have not been given it suffer a great deal for want of it. A defeat is an event. A failure is a verdict. An event happens in the world, on a particular day, to a particular undertaking, and then it is finished and lies behind you. A verdict happens inside a man, and does not lie behind him at all. It travels. He carries it into the next room, and the next year, and it sits in his voice when he is asked to take on something new. The event was the smaller half of the business, always. It is the verdict that decides what the event will cost him, and the verdict is issued by the only judge in the matter, who is himself. Watch how quietly the conversion is done. A thing does not work. That is the event. Then, in the days after, a sentence is formed, and the sentence begins with the word I. I am not the sort who can carry a thing of that size. I have not the head for it. I always come up short at that stage. Nobody hands him that sentence. He writes it himself, generally within a fortnight, and generally while tired, and then he lives under it for 20 years without ever once reviewing the evidence on which it was passed. And here is the thing to notice about the evidence. It was a single instance. In no other department of his life would a man of sense accept a single instance as proof of a permanent quality. If a friend failed once at a thing, he would say, on the spot, that anybody may have a bad season. He grants that to everyone he knows and withholds it only from himself, and he has never noticed the inconsistency because it has never been laid out in front of him. So refuse the verdict. That is the instruction, and it is a good deal smaller than it sounds. You are not required to feel differently about what happened. Feel exactly as badly as you feel. You are only required to decline the extra sentence, the one that turns a Tuesday into a permanent quality of your person, and to notice that the sentence is optional and always was. The thing did not work. That is the whole of what is known. Everything beyond that is not knowledge. It is a mood in the shape of a conclusion, and a mood has no standing to pass judgment on a man's life. What men learn from the season that went badly. Take a man who has had a hard year, and let it be genuinely hard, not the kind that is mostly inconvenience. Something was lost that mattered. There is a thing that happens to such a man, which he cannot see from inside the year, and it is worth saying tonight, quietly, because it is true, and it is not the usual encouragement. He becomes cheaper to run. I mean something exact by that. Before the hard year, a great many things were necessary to him. A certain standing, a certain regularity, the good opinion of a particular set of people, the arrangement of his days in the manner he was accustomed to. He would have said, if asked, that he could not do without them, and he would have believed it. The year took several of them away, and he found that he was still there afterwards. That discovery is not a small one. It is the removal of a fear he had been paying for continuously, without knowing the size of the bill. Every one of those necessary things had a fear behind it, the fear of losing it, and every one of those fears had been quietly editing his decisions for years. He had been declining work because of them. He had been keeping company with people he did not respect because of them. He had been unable to say a plain sentence in a meeting because of them. Afterwards, he is a cheaper man to run, and a cheaper man to run is a freer one, and the freedom shows up in his affairs within a year or two in ways that look to observers like a change of ability. I do not say the hard year was good. It was not good, and I have no interest in pretending that the bill for it was small. I say only that it delivered something, and that whether the delivery is collected is a separate matter entirely, decided afterwards by the man himself. Most men do not collect it. They spend the following years trying to restore the exact arrangement that was taken away, and in restoring it, they restore the fears with it, and they are back where they were, with the additional loss of the years. The one who collects is the one who looks at the wreck and asks a strange question. Which of these things do I now know I can live without? Whatever is on that list is no longer able to frighten him, and a man cannot be bought or steered with anything that does not frighten him. Why the man who has never been beaten is fragile. There is a kind of man whom everything has gone well for, and he is not to be envied as much as he generally is. He is fragile, and he does not know it, and the not knowing is the largest part of the fragility. A man who has never been beaten has never had occasion to find out what he is made of, so his estimate of himself rests entirely on the fact that nothing has yet gone against him. That is a poor foundation to stand a life on. It is not knowledge of his own strength. It is an absence of evidence to the contrary, and he has been reading the absence as evidence. You will see the consequence when the first real reverse arrives, as it does to everybody eventually, and it arrives to him at 50 rather than at 25. He takes it far harder than a man ought to take a thing of that size. It goes deeper than the event warrants, because for him it is not one event. It is the first crack in an idea of himself he has held without examination since boyhood, and the idea has grown a great deal heavier than it was, and when it goes, it takes a good deal with it. Whereas the man who was knocked over at 26 and got up holds his estimate of himself on a different basis. He is not relying on an unbroken run. He has the one piece of evidence that actually settles the question, which is that he has been down and has come back up, and he has no need to be told what he would do, because he already knows what he did. That man is nearly impossible to frighten with a threat of failure, and men who cannot be frightened with a threat of failure are the ones who take the positions worth taking. So if you are in the middle of something that has gone against you, I will not tell you it is a blessing, because at the time it is not one, and you would be right to distrust anybody who said so. I will tell you only what it is buying, so that you do not throw away the purchase. It is buying the end of a particular fear, and that fear has been the most expensive thing you own. Once a man has been through the thing he was afraid of, and is still walking about and eating his dinner, the fear has nothing left to threaten him with. He has already seen the bottom of it. It is only the men who have never been there who imagine it is bottomless. Seeing a thing that is not there yet. There is a faculty that men are born with and mostly leave unused, and it is the faculty of seeing plainly a thing that does not yet exist. Every article in the room you are sitting in was once nowhere but inside a man's head. The room itself was, the lamp was, the methods by which the money was earned that paid for both were. Nothing around you arrived from anywhere except that one place, and yet the faculty responsible is the one men are most inclined to call impractical. Now, I want to separate this from wishing, because the two are constantly confused, and they have almost nothing in common. Wishing is a pleasant occupation with no consequences. A man wishes for a better position in the way he watches weather, and the wish leaves no trace on the day. It is entertainment, and there is no harm in it beyond the time. Vision is a different operation. Vision is holding a thing steadily enough and in enough particulars that the mind begins working on the route to it without being asked. That is the whole mechanism, and it is not mystical. A question held long enough in front of the deeper part of a man is answered by it, generally at an odd hour, and generally when he is thinking of something else entirely. The particulars are what divide the two. A wish is vague and stays vague, because vagueness is comfortable and cannot fail. A vision has edges. It knows what the thing looks like when it is working, and who it serves, and what the first day of it would require. Those edges are not decoration. They are what gives the deeper mind something to work against. Men will tell you they are not imaginative. Very few of them are correct. Nearly all of them are imaginative for several hours a week, in a direction they would rather not admit to, which is the rehearsal of trouble that has not happened. A man who can construct a complete and vivid disaster on a Tuesday afternoon, with the words "everybody will say" and the look on the faces, has the faculty in perfect working order. He has simply had it pointed at the wrong wall. That is not a criticism, and it is not a small technical adjustment either, because the pointing has been habitual for years. But it is worth knowing that the machinery does not need building. It needs turning round. Whatever you are able to do to a fear, in the way of seeing it fully and in color, and with the details filled in, you are able to do to a thing you actually want, and it is precisely the same faculty, performing precisely the same operation. The two kinds of imagination a man has. It is worth separating two things that both go by the name of imagination, because they behave differently and are worked in different ways. The first arranges what already exists. A man takes an idea from one trade and sets it down in another where nobody has thought to use it. He takes two old things and puts them together, and the combination is new, although neither part is. This is the common sort, and it is not the poor relation. Most of what is called invention is exactly this, and any man may practice it deliberately, tonight, with nothing but attention. He need only carry the habit of asking, of a thing that works well somewhere, whether it would work in a place it has never been taken. The second is different. It does not arrange, it receives. A thing arrives whole, and it arrives without steps, and the man who has just received it cannot tell you how he got there because he did not travel. I will not pretend to explain the mechanism. I will say what may be observed about the conditions, because those are consistent and they are useful. It arrives to men who have already filled themselves with the material. It does not come to the empty. Every instance I know of, in myself and in the men I have questioned closely, was preceded by a long period of ordinary study, the dull kind, the kind that feels like nothing is happening. It arrives when the man has stopped working at it, in the bath, on a walk, in the first minute of waking. Never in the 9th hour at the desk. The pressing seems to hold the door shut. And it arrives to men who have been holding a definite question, not a general wish to have a good idea, which produces nothing whatever, but a particular question that has been carried about for weeks like a stone in the pocket. So the practical part is this, and it is unglamorous. Fill yourself with the material, hold one definite question, then stop pressing and go for a walk. The first sort will serve you all your life and may be worked to a schedule. The second cannot be commanded and comes when it will. But a man who has kept the first two conditions has put himself in the way of it, and the men to whom such things have never once occurred are, almost without exception, men who never filled themselves with anything and never carried a question longer than an afternoon. What vision costs while nobody believes it. There is a stretch in the middle of every undertaking that is not talked about, and it is the stretch that does the killing. At the beginning there is enthusiasm, and enthusiasm carries a man further than he expects. At the end, if he arrives, There is the thing itself, and the good opinion of everybody who doubted him, freely offered, with no memory on their part of having doubted. Between the two, there is a long gray country, in which the thing does not yet work, and cannot be shown to anyone, and has consumed a great deal more time than was estimated. Nobody believes in it. The man himself only believes in it on the better mornings. That country is where the faculty is actually tested, and it is tested not as imagination, but as endurance, which is why so many men of genuine vision arrive nowhere. They had the seeing, they had not counted on the crossing. Two things help, and I have not found a third worth mentioning. The first is to fix, at the outset while you are still clear-headed, what will count as evidence and what will not. A man who has not done this will take the opinion of the last person he spoke to as evidence, on both good days and bad, and he will be steered about by whoever happens to be in the room. Decide in advance what the real tests are, and how long each will take, and then let the opinions pass over you unweighed, since they were never measurements of anything. The second is to take the smallest true step that produces a real result rather than a large one that produces a feeling. Men in the gray country are constantly tempted into large gestures because a large gesture relieves the doubt for a day. It relieves nothing at all by the following week, and it has spent resources that were needed later. And a private word for the crossing itself, since some of you are in it now. The absence of belief around you is not information about the thing. It has been mistaken for information by better men than either of us. Nobody around you has seen what you have seen, for the sufficient reason that it is not there to be seen yet, and their not seeing it is therefore no evidence whatever about whether it will be. They are not opposing you. They are reporting the contents of the room. The contents of the room are exactly what you undertook to change. The law that makes everything permanent. There is a principle at work in a man's life that has no name in ordinary speech, and because it has no name, it is not defended against. I will put it as plainly as it can be put. Whatever is repeated becomes fixed, and once fixed, it operates without further permission. That is the whole of it, and it is neither friendly nor hostile. It is not a moral force. It does not know whether the thing being made permanent is worth keeping, any more than the ground knows whether the seed put into it is wheat or thistle. It takes what is given, and it makes it lasting. Consider what that means about an ordinary week. A man says a certain sentence about himself perhaps 4 times, to different people, without much thought, because it makes a passable remark, and gets a small laugh. Money and I have never got on. I have always been the one who leaves things half done. He is not lying, and he is not complaining. He is making conversation. But the principal does not know that, and it does not grade a statement by the seriousness with which it was offered. It takes the repetition, and begins the fixing, and within a year or two, the remark has become a fact about him, and he will produce evidence for it if you press him, and every piece of the evidence will have been produced after the remark. The same principle, working the other way, is why a man who has done a difficult thing daily for 6 months no longer finds it difficult, and cannot explain to anybody how he manages it. Nothing was added to him. The repetition simply fixed the thing, and it now runs of its own accord. So the practical question is never whether the principle will operate. It operates in every man alive, and it operated all of last year in you. The only question is what it was given to work on. And the answer, for most men, is that it was given whatever happened to be lying about. The mood of the mornings, the remarks made in company, the reading of the last thing before sleep. Nobody selected any of it, and yet all of it was faithfully fixed, and the result is a set of permanent arrangements that no one ever chose. That is not a fault in the man, and it is certainly not a fault in the principle. It is only that he never knew a selection was being taken, and that the selection is taken continuously, and that it is taken from whatever is in front of him at the time. The rhythm that nobody chose to enter. Watch the way things in nature take up a beat and hold it. The tide keeps its hours. The season comes round, whether or not the year was a good one. Once a rhythm is established, it does not need to be maintained by anybody, and this is as true of a man's affairs as it is of the water. A man's life falls into a rhythm within a few years of his leaving off deciding, and the rhythm then carries him without further effort, in whichever direction it was pointed when it set. You may see it in the plainest way in two households on the same street. In the first, small things get done at the time. The letter is answered on the day it arrives. The thing that is broken is mended in the week. Nothing about this household is remarkable. Nobody in it is working unusually hard, and if you ask them how they manage, they would not know what you meant, because to them, nothing is being managed. The beat is simply established, and everything falls in with it. In the second, small things wait. The letter waits, and then it is late, and being late, it is harder to answer, so it waits again. The mending waits, and the thing that was broken becomes a thing that must be replaced. Nobody in this household is lazy either, and this is the part worth attending to. They are frequently exhausted. The rhythm is simply pointed the other way, and it takes as little effort to keep as the first one did. The difference between those two houses was not a difference in character, and it did not begin as a large thing. It began with a few weeks, some years ago, that were allowed to run without attention, and the beat that was set in those weeks has been keeping itself ever since. Which is the discouraging half of the principle, and also the useful half, and the useful half is larger. If a rhythm sets in a few weeks, then a few weeks is what it takes to set another one, not a lifetime, not a transformation of the character, a short determined stretch in which the small things are done at the time, until the beat catches, after which the doing of them stops requiring anything from you. Men reject this because it sounds too small to be the answer to something that has bothered them for 15 years. The size of a trouble is no guide at all to the size of what starts it, and no guide to the size of what ends it either. The man who never decided anything. There is a type I want to hold in front of you for a while, because he is common, and because he is nearly always a good man, and because his condition is the one this whole 3 hours is about. He never decided anything. He took the work that was going, in the town where he happened to be. He kept it because leaving would have required a decision, and staying required none. He holds opinions he was handed at 19 and has not looked at since. His days are arranged in a manner that nobody selected, and if you asked him why any particular part of it stands as it does, he would give you a reason that he invented while you were asking. He is not stupid, he is not idle, he very often works harder than the men he serves. He is simply drifting, and the mark of drifting is not that a man is doing nothing, it is that he is doing a great deal without having chosen any of it. And here is what makes the condition so difficult to break, and I want to be honest about it rather than encouraging. Drifting is comfortable in a specific way. A man who has decided nothing has failed at nothing. Every disappointment in his life was administered by circumstances, and circumstances cannot be reproached, and neither can he. He is protected. The price of the protection is his whole life, and the price is paid so gradually that no single payment is ever noticed. I have no wish to be hard on him. There is more courage in his ordinary week than in a good deal of what is written about ambition. He gets up. He does what is required. He carries people who could not carry themselves. But there is a thing he does not know, and it is the only thing worth saying to him. The current he is in is not neutral. Nothing in his life is standing still while he waits to be ready. The rhythm is setting further every year in the direction it was already going, and at 50, it is a good deal harder to turn than it was at 30, not because the man has weakened, but because the beat has had 20 more years of keeping itself. Which is why the small deliberate act tonight is worth more than the large intention next spring. The large intention has no effect on the rhythm at all. The small act, repeated for a few weeks, is the only thing that has ever changed one. How a drift begins, which is never dramatically. It never begins with a surrender. Not one man in 1,000 ever gave in to anything, and that is exactly why so few of them see it happening. It begins with a reasonable postponement. There is a thing a man means to do, and this is not the week for it. That is true. It genuinely is not the week for it, and anybody looking at his circumstances would agree, and he is not deceiving himself in the smallest degree when he sets it aside. The second postponement is easier than the first, and it is easier for a reason that has nothing to do with weakness. It is easier because it is now a repetition, and repetition is what fixes things, and the principle does not inquire whether the thing being fixed is an action or the absence of one. By the 5th or 6th time, it is no longer a postponement at all. It has become a settled fact about his life, and he has stopped noticing that the question is still open, and if you asked him about the thing he once meant to do, he would speak of it in the past tense without hearing himself do it. Notice that there was no moment of giving up. There is never a moment. A man looking back for the day on which he abandoned it will not find one, because there was no such day, and this is why men are so often unable to account for how they came to be where they are. Now, I have said the discouraging half, and I will say the other half, which is exactly as true and less often mentioned. It goes the other way by the same road and at the same speed. A man does one small thing in the direction he intends. It changes nothing, and he can see that it changes nothing, and he is quite right, and the first one never does. He does it again in the week. By the fifth or sixth time, the repetition has begun its work, and it is fixing this as faithfully as it fixed the other, because the principle has no preference, and never had one. And at some point a few months on, the thing that required a decision every time stops requiring one. He does not notice this either. Men notice the effort while it is present, and do not notice the day it stops being needed. That is the entire mechanism, working in the direction of a man's choosing, and it asks nothing of him but that he supply the repetitions. Why a habit cannot be broken and must be replaced. There is a piece of common instruction that has wasted more effort than any other I know, and it is the instruction to break a habit. It cannot be done, and it has never once been done, and the reason is a matter of mechanics rather than of will. A habit is not an addition to a man that may be removed and leave him as he was. It occupies a place. It is doing something for him, at a certain hour, under a certain pressure, and it is doing it reliably, which is precisely why it survived. Take it out, and the place remains, and the place is not comfortable standing open, and by the end of the fortnight, something will be sitting in it. If the man has not chosen what, the old one comes back, because the old one knows the way. This accounts for the whole dismal pattern of the man who gives a thing up 4 times. He is not weak, and his resolution is not the trouble. He has been attempting an operation that does not exist. Each time, he removes and does not furnish, and each time the room stands open for a few weeks, and is then reoccupied by the only tenant who has the address. The instruction, then, is not to stop, it is to put something in the same place, at the same hour, under the same pressure, and to let the old thing be displaced, rather than evicted. The same hour matters more than men suppose. A habit is not attached to a general intention, it is attached to a moment and a signal, and the moment will arrive on schedule, whatever has been resolved. The man who has decided merely to be different in general meets the moment with nothing prepared and is carried off by it. And there is no interval in which the place stands empty. This is worth being exact about because men keep waiting for one. They believe there will be a clean period, a stretch in which the old thing is gone, and they are free to consider at leisure what ought to go in. There is no such stretch. The reoccupation begins immediately, and the only question that was ever open was whether the man had a candidate ready. So bring the candidate, have it settled before the hour arrives, and have it be a real thing that occupies the hands and the attention, not a resolution about the sort of man you intend to be. The place is going to be filled tonight, and every night. It has always been going to be filled. Nothing about that is in your hands, and it never was. What is in your hands is the small matter of who is standing there when it comes to be filled. The faculty that speaks before you have the facts. There is a thing that occasionally happens to men which they are reluctant to talk about, and I want to treat it plainly and without any excitement, because the excitement is what has kept it from being useful. A man knows something before he can say how he knows it. He meets a fellow he has no reason to distrust, and there is a note struck somewhere in him that says no. He does not act on it, because he has nothing to point to, and a man cannot decline an arrangement on the ground of a note. 18 months later the reason arrives in the post, and it is precisely what the note was about. Or he is turning a difficulty over, and has been for weeks, and the answer is handed to him whole, while he is shaving. I have no explanation to offer for this, and I will not manufacture one. I will say what appears to be true about the conditions, since that is all a man can honestly report on a matter of this kind. The first is that it comes to men who have filled themselves with the material, It is not a substitute for knowing your business. It behaves far more like a summing that has been done somewhere below the level at which a man watches himself think, out of facts he collected and did not consciously file, which would account for its being so often right about people, since a man collects a very great deal of information about a face and a voice and is not able to say what he collected. The second is that it is quiet. It says its piece once, in an ordinary tone, and does not argue, and does not repeat itself. Fear, by contrast, is loud, and repeats, and produces reasons, and grows when attended to. That difference is the most useful test I know of, and it will keep a man from mistaking one for the other, which is the error that has discredited the whole subject. The third is that it is nearly always drowned. Not overruled after consideration, drowned by a mind that is talking so continuously that a thing said once quietly has no chance of being heard at all. So the practical part is not a technique for summoning anything. There is no such technique, and men who sell one are selling something else. The practical part is only to be quiet enough, often enough, that a thing said once in an ordinary tone can reach you. That is a good deal less impressive than the subject is usually made to sound. It is also the only part of it that a man can act on. Hunches are worth writing down. A hunch is treated by most men as a thing that happens to them, and treated that way, it comes to nothing whatever, however many of them arrive. The reason is simple, and it is not mysterious. A hunch is not remembered. It presents itself, it is not written anywhere, and within the hour the ordinary business of the day has covered it over. When the matter it concerned works out badly some months later, the man has no memory of having been warned, and so he learns nothing, and the next one is treated exactly as carelessly as the last. I would put it this way: a man cannot form a judgment about a faculty he keeps no record of. So keep the record, and keep it in the flattest manner possible, with no ceremony about it. When a thing is said in that quiet single voice, write the sentence down, and write the date beside it, and put the book away. Do not act on it merely because it was written. That is a separate question, and generally a harder one. Then, once in a season, read back through 6 months of them. What a man finds when he does that is nearly always the same, and it is not what he expected in either direction. He finds that the notes are not oracular. A good many of them are simply nothing, and a certain number were fear in another suit of clothes, which is instructive by itself, since it shows him what fear sounds like on paper, where it cannot use its voice. And he finds a small number that were exactly right, and were right early, and were right about the sort of thing that is generally not knowable for another year. Now he possesses something he did not possess before. He is no longer obliged to believe or disbelieve the faculty in general, which is a debate that never closes. He has a record of his own, in his own hand, showing which sort of matters his own quiet voice is reliable about, and which sort it is not. For most men, the record shows that it is best about people and about timing, and rather poor about figures, and this makes a good deal of sense, if the summing account of it is anywhere near true, since a man collects vast quantities of unfiled information about a face, and almost none about a column of numbers. Whatever the record shows, it is yours, and it took no faith to obtain. It took a notebook and 6 months. The difference between a warning and a fear. Since I have said that the two are confused, I ought to give the marks by which they may be told apart, because a man in the middle of a difficult decision cannot be asked to work it out from first principles at the time. There are 4 differences, and they are consistent enough to rely on. The first is volume. The quiet thing says its piece once, in the tone in which a man remarks that it is raining. Fear does not say its piece once. It says it, and then says it again with additions, and it will still be saying it at 4 in the morning, and by then it has acquired supporting material that was not in the original. The second is direction. The quiet thing is nearly always about a particular, this arrangement, that man. Not on the Thursday. It is oddly specific, and it does not generalize. Fear is about the whole of your life, always, and it arrives at that scope within about 90 seconds. It begins with a meeting, and ends with your ruin, and it makes the journey so smoothly that a man does not notice he has been taken somewhere. The third is what happens when it is examined. Attend closely to the quiet thing and it does not grow. It stays the size it was, and often it goes flat, having delivered what it came for. Attend closely to a fear, and it feeds. 15 minutes of honest attention to a fear will leave you with a larger fear than you started with, every time, without exception, which is the surest test of the two. The fourth is the state of the man receiving it. The quiet thing comes when he is at ease, in the bath, on the road, half awake. Fear comes when he is tired, and it comes most reliably in the small hours, and any man who has kept the least record of his own nights knows that his 3 a.m. judgment has never once been correct about anything. I offer these as marks, and not as a system. A man who applies them will still be wrong sometimes, and the applying of them takes a minute and cannot be done in the middle of an argument. But they are enough to prevent the common disasters. They will stop a man from calling his own nerves a warning, which is how a good many opportunities are declined by men who then congratulate themselves on their prudence. And they will stop him from overriding, with a reason, a thing that was not making an argument in the first place, and therefore could not be answered with one. What a man believes about luck. Take a man who is careful about a ladder, and about a certain day of the month, and about the arrangement of things on a table, and ask yourself what that carefulness costs him. It costs him more than the small absurdities suggest, and the cost is not in the ladder. The cost is in the position he has taken up. He has agreed, in a quiet corner of himself, that his affairs are settled by something outside his conduct. Once that is agreed, it does not stay in the corner. A man who believes his fortunes turn on signs will read every reverse as a sign, and will read a run of 2 bad weeks as a verdict on the whole undertaking, and will abandon in October a thing that would have come good in February. He has handed the operation of his life to a system he cannot influence, and men do not work hard at what they believe they cannot influence. I am not concerned here with whether any of it is true, and I have no wish to argue about ladders. I am concerned with what the belief does to a man's conduct, which is measurable, and which is always in the same direction. It removes the sense that his own actions are the deciding element. Whatever removes that from a man removes the reason for the actions. Look at the same matter from the other side, and it becomes clearer. 2 men have an identical run of bad weeks. The first says that it is going against him, that the signs are poor, that this is not his season. He works with half a heart, because half a heart is all that is warranted when the outcome is not in his hands, and the following weeks are consequently worse, and the belief has been confirmed by its own operation. The second says that 11 of the last 15 calls went nowhere, and looks at the 11, and finds that 4 of them shared a feature he had not noticed. He alters the thing. The next run is better, and he calls it work, and his neighbor calls it luck. That is very nearly the whole difference between them, and it is not a difference in fortune. It is a difference in where each man has agreed to place the cause. I will grant readily that chance exists, and that a great deal of what happens to a man is outside his arranging. Only observe that this fact is available to both men equally, and that one of them is using it as a reason to look harder at his own methods, and the other is using it as a reason to stop. The slow kind of intemperance. A man expects intemperance to look like a man in the gutter, and while that man exists, he is not the case that ruins most lives, and pointing at him has allowed a great many men to consider the subject closed on their own account. The kind that does the damage is not visible from the street. It is the steady, respectable, slightly excessive thing that a man does every single day and would not think to mention. He eats a good deal more than his work requires, and he eats it at 11 o'clock at night. He takes something to get himself started in the morning, and something else to bring himself down at the end of it, and he has done this for so many years that he no longer knows what his own natural energy would feel like, and would be alarmed by it if it arrived. Nothing here is scandalous. Nobody has been harmed, and nobody would remark on it. The cost is paid entirely in the currency this whole night is concerned with, which is the quantity of a man that is available for use. He is at perhaps 7/10, not ill. Nobody would call him unwell, and a physician might find nothing to say. But the last 3/10 is where the good judgment lives, and the patience with his own household, and the capacity to attend to a difficult thing at 4 in the afternoon, rather than putting it off until a morning that will be no better. And he does not know that he is at 7/10, because 7/10 has been his ordinary condition for 11 years, and a man takes his ordinary condition for the human condition. That is the part that makes it so difficult to address. There is no moment at which the ground gives way. There is only a slow settling, and every stage of the settling is comfortable, and each stage is defended by the perfectly reasonable observation that he is not one of those men in the gutter. I would ask only for a trial, and a short one, since arguing about it is useless and I am not moralizing at anybody. Take one of them out for 3 weeks, not all of them, and not forever, and with no vow attached to it, because vows produce a great deal of resistance, and very little else. 3 weeks is long enough for the rhythm to settle in the other direction, and short enough that no part of a man rebels at the length. And at the end of it, judge the matter on evidence rather than on principle. If nothing whatever is different, you have lost 3 weeks, and may return to the arrangement with a clear head. Most men do not go back. Dishonesty that has been given a better name. I want to deal with the deliberate sort, and to leave aside altogether the man who is dishonest through weakness or fright, because that is a different subject, and a kinder one. The man I mean has decided. He has looked at a matter, seen the straight course and the crooked one, formed a view of the difference in what each would pay, and taken the second, and he has done it with his eyes open and his reasons ready. And the reasons are always ready. That is the thing to notice. No man alive conducts a piece of sharp practice while calling it sharp practice. It is what the trade does. Everybody would do the same in his position. The other party is no better, and would have done it first. He is owed it, on account of some old injury that has never been settled by anybody. The reasons differ. The structure never does. There is a thing he is going to do, and there is a sentence prepared in advance that makes it something else. Now I have no sermon to deliver about the effect on the other party. The other party is very often perfectly able to look after himself, and in a good many of these cases, the injury done to him is small. The injury I am concerned with is nearer home, and it is not the one men expect. It is that he now knows something about himself that he did not know before, and he cannot unknow it. He has established what his own word is worth when the price is right, and he has established it by demonstration, which is the only way it is ever really established. And the whole of a man's confidence is built on his estimate of himself. Not on his ability, which is smaller than men suppose, but on his estimate. That estimate is what allows him to stand in a room and say a plain thing and be believed, and to hold to an arrangement when it turns unprofitable, and to take a large risk without an anxiety that eats him. He has just put a hole in it, and the hole is permanent, and no amount of subsequent success covers it over. It is why so many men who have done well by that route are so peculiarly restless, and so quick to take offense at a slight nobody else noticed, and so unable to be still in an empty house. They are not being punished by anybody. Nothing is coming for them. They have simply lost the ability to think well of themselves without an argument, and a man who requires an argument to think well of himself will spend the rest of his life supplying it. The man who guesses and calls it deciding. There is a manner of conducting affairs which looks from the outside exactly like decisiveness, and is its opposite, and the two are so easily confused that a man may practice the wrong one for 30 years while being praised for the right one. It is the habit of guessing. He is asked what the figure is, and he says a figure. He does not know the figure. He has never known the figure, and he has not looked it up, and the figure he has said is somewhere in the region of a number he heard 18 months ago in another connection. It is said with complete confidence, because a man who says a number hesitantly is thought poorly of, and the room accepts it, and it is now in the minutes. Nobody has lied. He would be genuinely astonished to be told that anything improper had occurred. But a decision has now been taken on a number that came out of nowhere, and it will be built on, and 3 further decisions will rest on it, and in 8 months something will go wrong for a reason that nobody will ever trace back to a man being asked a question in a corridor. The whole of it comes from an idea that men absorb early and never inspect, which is that not knowing is a disgrace, and must be concealed at any cost. So the 4 most useful words in business are the ones men are least able to say. I do not know. And the 4 that come after them are the ones that make the first 4 respectable, which are, I will find out. I have some sympathy with the difficulty. A man who says he does not know, in a room where every other man is saying numbers with great assurance, feels for about 4 seconds as though he has admitted to being unfit for his position. What actually happens is worth knowing, because it is the reverse of what he fears. The room does not think less of him. Within a very short time, it comes to treat everything he does say as reliable, precisely because he has shown that he distinguishes between what he knows and what he supposes. That distinction is rarer than any talent, and it is recognized immediately by everyone who has been burned by its absence. So the man who admits ignorance 4 times a year becomes, without setting out to, the man whose figures are not questioned. And the guesser, who was never once caught out in anything, and who has been fluent in every meeting for 2 decades, finds that his numbers are quietly checked by somebody else before they are used, and that nobody has ever told him so. The wish to receive without giving. There is a disposition that ruins more men than drink, and it is never called by a hard name because it wears the appearance of shrewdness. It is the wish to get something without putting anything in. I want to be careful, because, said quickly, this sounds like an attack on the man who wants a better bargain, and wanting a better bargain is sound, and I have no quarrel with it. The thing I mean is different. It is the settled expectation that there exists, somewhere, an arrangement by which a man receives without supplying, and that finding it is the whole art of getting on. The man who holds that expectation is not idle. He is generally the busiest man of your acquaintance. He is forever in motion, always at the edge of an arrangement, always in possession of information that has not yet reached the general public, and at 50 he has nothing, and the nothing is a puzzle to him. Here is what the disposition costs, and the cost is not chiefly the money lost in the schemes. It costs him every ordinary road, because every ordinary road requires him to put in first. A trade requires 4 years before it pays properly. A business requires 2 lean ones. A reputation requires a decade of doing what was undertaken. Every one of those is available to him, and he cannot take any of them, because to a man watching for the arrangement that pays without supplying, 4 years of putting in looks like the behavior of a fool who has not understood how the world is arranged. So he passes them by, year after year, and each thing he passes was a thing that would have paid. And there is a second cost that is heavier and less obvious. He is the natural prey of every sharp practitioner alive, and he is not preyed upon by accident. He is sought out. A man cannot be cheated in the ordinary way unless he wants something for nothing, since the whole mechanism of the thing turns on him believing he is receiving more than he is giving. His disposition is his address, and it is legible to anyone in that trade at 40 paces. There is a plain rule here, and it has never once failed me. Where a return is offered that is far out of proportion to what is put in, the difference is being taken from somebody, and if the man cannot see from where, it is being taken from him. The reverse disposition costs nothing, and pays slowly, and pays without interruption. It is simply to arrange, in every dealing, that the other party should feel he had rather the better of it. That sounds like a way to become poor. Follow it for 10 years and count the number of men who will take your call, and then work out what that is worth against the small margin given away each time. Indecision is itself a decision. There is a state that a man may remain in for years, while believing that nothing is being settled, and the belief is his whole trouble. He has a matter before him. He turns it over. He has been turning it over since the spring. He speaks of it as still open, as under consideration, as a thing he means to resolve when 1 or 2 other matters are clearer. And all that time the matter is being settled, daily, in the only manner that counts, which is by what actually happens. The position is being filled by somebody else. The offer is being withdrawn without a word. The person who asked is asking somebody else, and has stopped expecting an answer. The world does not wait upon a man's deliberations, and it does not hold a place open out of courtesy while he weighs. So the choice was never between deciding and not deciding. It was between deciding and having it decided, and having it decided by the passage of time is the one method that guarantees the outcome will not be the one he would have chosen. Now, why do men do this, since none of it is difficult to see? They do it because an open matter is a matter in which nothing has yet been lost. Every choice costs the other choices. The moment a man decides, all the alternative lives close, and he must stand on what he took and find out whether it was right. While he is still deliberating, he holds all of it. He is a man who might yet do any of those things, and there is a real pleasure in being such a man, and the pleasure is available every day at no charge until the day it is not available at all. So, the deliberation is not deliberation. It is a way of keeping the pleasure and postponing the finding out. I would offer one plain instrument, since a principle without an instrument is a comfortable evening and nothing more. Set a date, and set it while you are calm, and let it be soon. On that date the matter is answered, one way or the other, and there is no third option in which it remains open. You will find that a great many matters, given a date, answer themselves within about 10 minutes, because the weighing was never the difficulty. The difficulty was the closing of the doors, and a date closes them for you, so that a man does not have to summon the resolve to shut a door that has been standing open for 8 months. What passes for thinking and is not? Very little of what men call thinking is thinking. Most of it is one of 3 other operations, and it is worth being able to tell them apart, because none of the 3 ever arrived at anything. The first is remembering. A man turns a matter over, and what he is doing is calling up what he already concluded about it in the past, examining that and putting it back. Nothing enters and nothing is tested. He has been round the same room 11 times, and each time he calls it consideration. The second is rehearsing. He is not weighing the matter. He is practicing a conversation about it. He is saying the thing to his employer, and hearing the reply and adjusting his answer. This can be done for hours, and it feels like the hardest work of the day, and produces exactly nothing, because at the end of it, the matter stands precisely where it did, and only the man is tired. The third is worrying, which has been treated already tonight and needs no further hours. Actual thinking has 2 marks, and they are not difficult to check for. The first is that it takes in something from outside, a fact that was not previously in the man's possession, a number he looked up rather than supposed, the opinion of a person who has done the thing rather than the opinion of a person who has views about it. If nothing has entered the room in the last hour, no thinking has occurred in it. The second is that it separates what is known from what is assumed, and it does this on paper, because it cannot be done reliably in the head. In the head, the 2 run together and are the same color. Written in 2 lists, they are entirely different articles, and men are frequently shocked at how short the first list is, and how confidently they have been acting on the second. That is the whole method, and there is nothing clever in it. Get the facts, separate them from your suppositions, then decide, knowing which of the 2 you are deciding on. Men avoid it for a plain reason, and it is not laziness. It is that the 2 lists take a position away from you. A man with his facts and his assumptions mixed together may believe whatever suits him and feel entirely reasonable while doing it. Sort them, and he can no longer do that, and he will have to act, or admit that he is choosing not to. Facts that are convenient, and facts that are true. There is a distinction that must be made, or the whole business of accurate thought collapses, and it is between the important fact and the merely true one. A man may be entirely correct in everything he says, and still be reasoning badly, and this is the commonest form of bad reasoning among intelligent men. He has assembled 20 true things, and every one of them is true, and he has selected them, without knowing that he was selecting, on the ground that they support the position he came in with. The 20 that pointed the other way were also available. He did not suppress them, which would at least be a conscious act. He simply did not find them interesting, and so they were not gathered, and he is now standing on a foundation of perfectly sound material that has been quarried entirely from one side of the hill. The test for this is uncomfortable, and it takes about a quarter of an hour, and I know of no other that works. Take the position you hold most strongly on some matter of your own affairs, and set out to build the opposite case as though you were being paid to win it. Not a weak version of the opposite case, which men make constantly and call fairness. The strongest one available, with the best facts in it that you can find, argued as well as you are able to argue. 2 things come of it, and both are worth the quarter of an hour. Either you find that the opposite case is stronger than you supposed, in which case you have been saved from something, and generally from something expensive. Or you find that it is weaker, and your original position now rests on ground you have inspected yourself rather than ground you happen to be standing on, and you will hold it more calmly ever afterwards, and you will stop needing to win arguments about it, which is a considerable saving in itself. There is a mark by which a man may know he has not done this work, and it is worth watching for in yourself tonight. If he cannot state the other side's case, in a form the other side would accept as fair, he does not understand the matter. He understands his own position, and a poor caricature of the alternative, and he has been mistaking his ability to knock down the caricature for evidence that he is right. Any man may test himself on this in 5 minutes, with any question he holds a firm view about. Most men who try it discover that they have held the view for 20 years without ever once having heard it opposed by anybody competent. Why some men are easy to be with. There is a quality that opens more doors than ability, and men are given remarkably little instruction in it because it is assumed to be a matter of birth. It is not a matter of birth. It is a set of small habits, every one of which may be adopted by a man of 60 who has never had any of them. Begin with what it is not, since the common idea of it is the reason so many men decline to work at it. It is not charm, and it is not the ability to talk well. Those are ornaments, and the room forgets them by Thursday. Some of the most agreeable men in any room are quiet and rather plain in their speech. What they had was attention. An agreeable man is a man in whose presence another man feels that he is being attended to. That is very nearly the whole of it. The rest is technique in the service of that one thing. Consider how rare it actually is. In the ordinary conversation, neither party is listening. Each is waiting, with his own remark loaded and ready, watching for the gap in which to fire it. Both men leave having said their piece, and neither has been heard, and both are faintly unsatisfied, and neither could tell you why. Into that room comes a man who is not waiting. He asks a second question about the thing you said, which reveals that he took in the first answer. He remembers, a fortnight later, the matter you mentioned in passing, and asks how it came out. He does not glance past your shoulder to see who else has arrived. Nothing there requires charm. Every part of it requires an interest in the other man that is real, and here is the hard sentence of the evening. It cannot be counterfeited for long. Men detect the counterfeit within about 3 meetings, and the counterfeit leaves a worse impression than plain indifference would have. So the work is not in the manner. The work is in becoming genuinely interested, and the way to that is smaller than it sounds. Every man alive knows something you do not. Find it. It is always there, and it is generally not the thing he is known for. Do that as a practice for a year, and the manner arrives on its own, and men will begin to say that you have a way with people, and you will know that you have no way with people at all, and merely stopped waiting for your turn. The cost of being right in the wrong manner. I want to put one more piece beside that, because a man may have the attention and still make himself impossible, and it is the commonest failing of able men. He is right, and he is right in a manner that costs him everything the rightness was worth. Consider what actually happens in a room when a man is corrected in front of others. The correction may be entirely accurate, every fact in it may be sound, and the person corrected does not receive facts at that moment, because the part of him that receives facts has gone off duty and been replaced by the part that defends a position in front of witnesses. So the correction is not received. What is received is the loss of standing, and that is remembered with perfect clarity for 11 years, long after the matter itself is forgotten by everybody. The able man does this constantly and cannot understand the result. He has been accurate, generous with his knowledge, and quick to prevent errors, and he finds that he is not sent for. Lesser men are consulted ahead of him. He concludes that the world prefers comfort to truth, and he is half right, and the half he is wrong about is the half he could have altered. The alteration is not a matter of softening the truth, and I would not ask any man to trade in a false article. It is a matter of 2 small things. The first is the setting. The same sentence said privately, to the man alone, is a different sentence altogether. It costs him nothing in front of anybody, so he can afford to consider it, and a man who can afford to consider a thing generally does. The second is the ownership. A correction offered as a question rather than a verdict leaves the other man in possession of the conclusion. He arrives at it himself, and having arrived at it himself, he will defend it against others afterwards, which is the whole object, since a conclusion a man has been given, he holds until Friday, and one he has reached, he holds for good. None of this is management of people, and I would not have it taken for that. It is only the recognition that a truth has to be received before it does any work, and that the manner of the giving decides whether it is received at all. A man may be right in a fashion that leaves the error standing, and there is nothing in that for anybody but the pleasure of having been right, which is a small and rather cold thing to be collecting at the end of a life. Doing the thing before being told. There is a small act that separates men more sharply than talent does, and it is the act of beginning a thing that nobody has instructed you to begin. Most men wait. They wait well, and they wait in good faith, and they are not shirking. They have been taught, from their first employment, that the proper course is to do thoroughly what is asked, and to leave what is not asked to the person whose business it is. That is a respectable position, and it will keep a man employed for 40 years at very nearly the figure he began on. What it will not do is make him necessary. Consider how a man becomes necessary, since it is not by working harder than the others, and never has been. It is by there being a thing that stops when he stops, and that thing is almost never the thing he was hired for. It is the thing he took up because he saw it needed taking up, and nobody else had. Now, I know the objection, because every man makes it, and it is not a foolish one. Take a thing up unasked, and you may be told to mind your own affairs. That happens. It happens in about 1 house in 4, and it tells you something worth knowing about the house. But look at the arithmetic of it, rather than the fear. The man who begins nothing avoids that rebuke every time, and in exchange for avoiding it, he has agreed to be exactly as valuable in his 11th year as in his 2nd. He has bought the absence of one uncomfortable conversation at a price of about 30 years. There is a manner of doing it that avoids most of the trouble, and it costs nothing to adopt. Begin small, and begin where the thing is plainly falling through. Not the interesting work that another man is proud of, which is not initiative but trespass, and is properly resented. The dull thing at the join between 2 people's duties, which both suppose is the other's, and neither is doing. Every house has several, and they are all sitting there unclaimed. Take one, do it without announcing it. Do it for long enough that its being done becomes part of the ordinary running of the place, and then let it be discovered rather than reported, because a thing found is worth several times a thing presented. The finding takes longer. It also arrives with a weight that no announcement of your own has ever carried. What men follow, and it is not the loudest. Since the subject is leadership, I will say the plain part first, because the elaborate treatments of it obscure a matter that is not complicated. Men follow the man they believe will not sell them. Everything else is secondary, not ability, though ability helps, and its absence is eventually fatal. Not force of manner, which impresses at the first meeting and wears through by the 5th. Not eloquence, which men enjoy and do not act on. They follow the man they believe will not sell them, and they form that belief from evidence, and the evidence is always small and is always collected when he does not know he is being watched. Here is the sort of thing it is made of. He takes the blame in front of the man above him for a thing that was not his. He does it once, briefly, without making a performance of it, and every person present has understood the whole of his character within about 4 seconds, and will not need to be told again. He gives the credit away by name, and by name is the part that matters, since credit given in general terms is not given at all. He tells the room the piece of news it does not want. That is the heaviest of them, and the one most often shirked. A leader who has once concealed a bad thing to keep the peace has spent the whole of his capital, because from that day forward, every piece of good news he brings will be weighed against the possibility that he is managing them again. And he does not make a promise he is not certain of keeping, which requires that he refuse to promise things constantly, in the face of men who are asking him to, and be thought unhelpful for it in the moment. Notice what is absent from that list. There is nothing in it about being able. There is nothing in it about strength of personality. There is nothing that a quiet man of ordinary gifts could not do beginning tomorrow morning. That is not an accident of my choosing. It is why leadership so often turns up in men that nobody had marked out for it, and why the man who was marked out for it, and who has the voice and the manner and the confidence, so frequently finds at the critical hour that the room is politely doing something else. The difference between excitement and enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is thought to be a matter of temperament, so that a man either has it or has not, and the men who suppose themselves not to have it are generally confusing it with something else entirely. Excitement is a state of the nerves. It is loud, it is pleasant, it arrives quickly, and it goes at the same speed, and it has no bearing whatever on what a man does in the 11th week. Any competent speaker may produce it in a room in 20 minutes, and it will be entirely gone by Tuesday, and everybody who has sat in such a room knows this and has watched it happen to himself. Enthusiasm is a different article, and it is not about the nerves at all. It is the condition of a man who is genuinely interested in the thing in front of him. That is all it is, and it is why a quiet man may have a great deal of it, and a loud man none. It shows in his attention and not in his voice. He knows the details of the matter, including the dull ones. He turns it over on a Sunday when nothing requires him to. He notices the small improvement that nobody asked for. He would not himself use the word about his own condition. Ask him and he would say only that it is interesting work. Now here is the part that is of some use, because a man cannot be instructed to feel interested, and any attempt to command it produces the counterfeit. Interest follows understanding, nearly always, and in that order, which is the reverse of what men assume. A thing is dull to a man very largely because he knows the surface of it and no more, and the surface of anything is dull. Every trade on earth becomes absorbing at a certain depth, and the depth is not far down, and the men who find their work interesting are without exception men who went past the point at which the rest stopped. So the practical instruction for a man who finds his work flat is not to change his work, though he may end by doing that. It is to go 2 feet deeper into some particular corner of it, for no reason and with no object, and see whether the flatness survives. It generally does not, and an interested man is worth 3 of any other kind, and the difference is visible to everybody around him within a month, and nobody will ever attribute it to 2 feet of digging in a corner that was not required. Why enthusiasm cannot be manufactured for long. I want to add the caution, because the age is full of instruction in the appearance of enthusiasm, and the appearance is a worse position to occupy than plain indifference. A man may produce the manner without the condition. He may raise his voice and use the warmer words, and carry himself about the place as an interested man carries himself. It works for a short while, on strangers, at a distance. It fails on 3 counts, and every one of them is fatal in the end. It fails first because it must be maintained, and maintaining it is real work performed continuously, in addition to the actual work. The genuine article costs a man nothing to keep. The imitation costs him something every hour he is observed, and he is tired in a manner that has no cause he can point to. It fails second because it is not consistent under strain. The manner holds in the ordinary hours and slips in the bad ones, and the bad ones are exactly when people are watching most closely and remembering longest. And it fails third, for a reason that is worth dwelling on. The people around him detect it, and they detect it long before they can say what is wrong, and the effect on them is not neutral. They do not merely discount his warmth. They come to distrust warmth in general, and having been made to distrust warmth by him, they will meet the next genuine man with a suspicion he has done nothing to earn. So the counterfeit does an injury that outlasts the man's employment. I would say then, to a man who has been advised to be more enthusiastic and has been trying it on and finding it hollow, that his instinct is correct and he should stop. The instruction was not wrong about the value of the thing. It was wrong about where the work goes. The work does not go into the manner. It goes into finding, in the matter before him, some part that he can honestly attend to, and then attending to it, and letting the manner report whatever it will. A man cannot decide to feel. He can decide where to look, and the feeling follows the looking with a reliability that is nearly mechanical, and it takes rather less time than anybody expects. Two men who want the same thing are not allies. Cooperation is spoken of as though it were a matter of goodwill, and goodwill is the smallest part of it and the first part to fail. Watch two men who have agreed to work together on a footing of goodwill alone. Everything holds while the work is easy. Then a difficulty arrives, or an unexpected sum, or a piece of credit that cannot be divided evenly, and the goodwill is asked to carry a weight it was never built for. It cracks, and both men are astonished, and each concludes privately that the other was not the man he took him for. Neither was at fault. They built a bridge out of good intentions, and drove a cart over it. Real cooperation rests on something less flattering, and a great deal stronger, which is that each man's interest is arranged to run in the same direction as the other's. That is not cynicism, and I would resist the word. It is simply the recognition that men are steady in the pursuit of their own good, and unsteady in everything else, and that an arrangement which requires a man to act repeatedly against his own interest will fail, not because he is bad, but because that is a great deal to ask of anybody, every day, for years. So the questions to settle at the beginning are the unromantic ones, and they must be settled at the beginning because they cannot be settled afterwards. Who decides when the two of you do not agree? Not how disagreements will be discussed, which is a matter of manners, but who decides, since a partnership in which nobody decides is a partnership that stops at the first genuine difference. How is it divided if it goes well beyond expectation? That is the question men are most reluctant to raise while everything is friendly and small, and it is the one that ends more good undertakings than failure does. And how does a man leave? Settle that while both of you intend to stay, because it is the only time it can be settled generously by either party. Men avoid these three conversations because raising them seems to show a want of trust, and they mistake the discomfort of the hour for a sign that the questions are improper. It is the reverse. A man willing to settle them in advance is showing you that he intends the thing to last past the pleasant part, and a man unwilling to settle them has told you something important at no cost to yourself. What a man owes to the people he works beside. There is a matter that is not usually put under this heading, and belongs here more than anywhere, and it concerns the men and women a man spends his days among who are neither his partners nor his employers. He owes them a good deal, and it is not chiefly effort. He owes them, first, that they should know where they stand with him. A man who is warm on Monday and distant on Thursday, for reasons entirely internal to himself, imposes a cost on every person in the building. They must guess at his weather before they approach him. They must time their requests. They must interpret an ordinary silence, and the interpreting is done at their expense, in worry, in an evening at home, spent wondering what was meant by a remark that meant nothing at all. Being the same on both days is a considerable gift, and it costs only the small discipline of not spending one's mood on the room. He owes them, second, that his word about small things should be as good as his word about large ones. Men take great care over the important undertakings, and are careless about the trifles, and it is precisely the trifles that establish what a man's word is worth, because there are 100 of them a month, and only 2 of the others in a year. If you said you would send the figures on Wednesday, send them on Wednesday, or say plainly that you will not. Nothing is riding on the figures. Everything is riding on the pattern, and the pattern is being read continuously by people who are not conscious of reading it. And he owes them the plain fact, when the plain fact concerns them. Not every fact, and there is nothing owed in the way of a general unburdening. But a man who knows a thing that will land on somebody in a fortnight, and lets him walk into it uninformed to spare himself an awkward half-hour, has done an injury that no subsequent kindness makes up. None of this is generosity. Generosity is a separate matter, and may be added by whoever wishes. This is only the ordinary maintenance of a man's dealings, the sort of thing that is never noticed while it is present, and produces, over 10 or 15 years, the condition in which people are glad to see him come in, and will do a thing for him, without being asked twice. That condition is worth more in the practical way than any talent he could have been born with, and it is built entirely out of Wednesdays. The hour nobody is paying you for. There is an arrangement available to every working man that is so plain it is generally passed over, and it is to render rather more service than is being paid for. I know how that sounds at the first hearing. It sounds like the counsel given to young men by comfortable old ones who profited by the arrangement themselves, and a man who has been badly used at work has every right to a certain hardness about it. So let me put it on ground that does not require anybody's goodwill. A man is paid for what he does. He is promoted for what he does that he was not paid for. Those are two different transactions, and men keep confusing them, and the confusion accounts for a great deal of stalled and puzzled ambition. The first transaction is closed every Friday. You did the work, the money came, and neither party owes the other anything further. A man who does exactly his work, however well, is settling up in full every week of his life. And at the end of 30 years the account balances exactly, and there is nothing standing to his credit anywhere. The second transaction is what accumulates. It is not paid in money, and it does not arrive on any schedule. What it produces is a standing, held in the minds of a small number of people, that he is a man who does more than the arrangement requires. That standing is the thing that is drawn on when a position falls vacant, or when somebody is deciding who is to be sent to the difficult customer, or when the question is, which two men to keep in a bad year. Now the honest part, because this counsel is dishonestly given more often than not. It does not always pay, and it does not pay everywhere. There are houses in which extra service is quietly absorbed, and nothing whatever comes of it, and a man may put in 2 years of it, and receive not one word. That is not a failure of the principle. It is information about the house, and it is expensive information, obtained cheaply, and a man who has it should act on it rather than continue to make gifts to people who are not looking. But even in that house, notice what he has and cannot be deprived of. He has done a harder thing than his position required, which means he can now do it. The ability does not stay behind when he leaves. He walks out of the door with it, and it is worth precisely what it is worth in the next place. And the next place, unlike this one, may be watching. So it is never a total loss, and that is more than can be said for most of the ways a man may spend an extra hour. Why the extra is never wasted even when it is not seen. I want to stay with this a while longer because the objection men raise is a serious one and deserves better than encouragement. The objection is that the extra service is stolen. Somebody else takes the credit. The house pockets the benefit and pays nothing for it, and the man who gave it is left where he was, and rather foolish. All of that happens. I will not pretend otherwise, and a man who has had it happen twice is entitled to his caution. Here is what happens alongside it, which is not visible and is not stolen by anybody. He becomes able. That is the plain, unglamorous fact, and it is the whole of the argument. A man who has repeatedly done what was not asked of him has done a wider range of things than his position contains, and at the end of 5 years he is competent in 4 directions, where his colleague is competent in 1. Nobody gave him that, and nobody can remove it. It is not in the gift of the house. And here is the second thing, which men do not expect and find surprising when it arrives. The extra work is nearly always the interesting work. The work a man is paid for is defined and bounded, and somebody else settled its shape years ago. The work he takes up unasked is chosen by him, and it is chosen because something in it caught his attention, and work chosen that way does not wear a man down in the manner the other kind does. So the man who has been doing this for some years is generally the one who is not tired at 45. It looks like a constitution, and it is nothing of the sort. He has been spending a portion of every week on something he elected to do, and that portion has been paying him back in a currency the wage packet knows nothing about. I will put the whole of it in one sentence, since it is a plain matter and does not need a long one. The service may be taken from you. What the giving of it made you cannot be, and that was always the larger half of the payment. And the men who understood this were never depending on being noticed in the first place. No man has ever done anything large alone. There is a fact about accomplishment that is so consistent it may be treated as a rule, and it is that nothing of any size has ever been done by one man. The record does not contain an exception. Every large undertaking, on inspection, turns out to be a small number of people whose minds were working on the same object, and the man whose name is attached to it was generally the one who assembled them rather than the one who supplied the ideas. This is worth dwelling on, because the picture men carry is the opposite one. They picture a solitary figure of unusual gifts, and they measure themselves against that figure, and they find themselves short, and the finding short is entirely reasonable, since the figure never existed. Now, the mechanism of it is more interesting than the fact. When two men in agreement work on the same problem, something arrives that neither of them brought into the room. That is not a sentiment about teamwork, and any man who has sat in such a conversation knows exactly what is meant. A third position appears that neither held at the start, and both men leave with something they did not carry in, and neither can afterwards say which of them supplied it. I have no explanation for it, and offer none. I say only that it is reliable enough to be built on, and that the conditions under which it appears are consistent. It requires agreement about the object, not agreement about method, which is useless, and is generally a sign that one of the two is not really present. Agreement about what is being attempted, held by both, in the same terms. It requires that the men be of different make. Two men who see everything the same way produce nothing between them but confirmation, which is pleasant and worthless. The value is in the friction, and the friction is only tolerable when the object is genuinely shared, which is why the first condition cannot be skipped. And it requires meeting often enough that the matter is continuously alive, rather than being reopened from cold every few months. 3 or 4 men on those terms will accomplish things that 30 could not, and the 30 will be better qualified. Any man may assemble such a group, and the assembling costs nothing but the asking. And the reason so few exist is that men are waiting to be invited into one, rather than forming it themselves. How such a group is actually assembled. Since I have said any man may form one, I ought to say how, because the advice is worthless without it, and the obvious method does not work. The obvious method is to gather your friends. It fails, and it fails for a reason that has nothing to do with the quality of your friends. A friendship rests on the agreement not to press each other too hard, and pressing each other is the entire function of the thing you are trying to build. So the group meets, and is agreeable, and nobody says the useful, uncomfortable sentence, and after 4 meetings it has become a pleasant evening with a name attached to it. The method that works is slower and less comfortable, and may be begun this month. Find one man who is doing something, not a man who talks about doing something, of whom there is an inexhaustible supply, but one who is actually at work on a matter of his own, however small it is, and however unlike yours. Ask him about it, and here is the part that must be got right. Ask because you want to know, and go on asking past the point where politeness would stop, into the details of how the thing is actually done. Nearly every man alive is starved of a person who wants to know the details of his work, and a man who supplies that is remembered. Then bring him something, a fact he did not have, a name, a way round a difficulty he mentioned. Do it once, without being asked, and without making anything of it. That is the whole method, and it has produced every alliance of the sort I have any knowledge of. It cannot be hurried, and it cannot be done at a gathering arranged for the purpose, since men do not form these attachments to order. 2 men on those terms is already the thing itself. It does not require a name, a fixed hour, or a third member, and a great deal of good work has been done by exactly 2 men who would not have used any of the language I have used tonight. Knowing a great deal and being able to do nothing. There is a kind of man who is defeated by his own education, and it is a peculiarly modern defeat. He knows a great deal. He has read widely, he can give you an account of most subjects, and he is the most informed man in any ordinary room. And nothing comes of it, and he cannot understand why men of a quarter his knowledge are doing the things he can only discuss. The trouble is that general knowledge does not convert. It never did. A man may know something of everything, and be able to do nothing in particular, and there is no rate of exchange at which the first becomes the second. What converts is specialized knowledge, and it converts on one condition, which is that it be organized toward a definite end. Knowledge lying about loose in a man's head is not power, and has never once behaved like power. It is material, and material is worth nothing until it is put to a use. This ought to be encouraging rather than otherwise, and I mean it so. It means the quantity a man must know is far smaller than he has been supposing. He does not need the education he feels the want of. He needs a particular set of facts bearing on a particular object, and that set is generally not large, and may be got in a year, by a man of ordinary ability who is willing to be narrow for a while. The willingness to be narrow is the whole difficulty. It costs a man the pleasure of being widely informed, which is a real pleasure and a respectable one, and it costs him the ability to hold his own on every subject in the room. He must consent to be ignorant of a great many interesting things in order to be useful in one, and men of intellectual habit find that consent very hard to give. There is a second half to this, and it is the more freeing of the two. A man does not have to hold the knowledge himself. He has to be able to reach it. Every large thing that was ever built was built by somebody who did not personally know most of what went into it, and who knew instead where each piece of it was to be found and who possessed it. That is not a lesser accomplishment, and it is not a trick. It is the recognition that a mind is limited in what it can carry and unlimited in what it can call upon, and that the man who spends his life trying to carry everything has chosen the smaller of the two. What to learn and what to leave alone. The practical question that follows is how a man is to choose, since he cannot learn everything and has already discovered that learning a little of everything comes to nothing. I would put 3 tests to any body of knowledge before spending a year on it. The first is whether it bears on something you intend to do, not something you find interesting, which is a different test and a poor one for this purpose. There is no shortage of fascinating material in the world, and a man may spend his whole life being fascinated. The question is whether, at the end of the learning, there is an act that becomes available to you which is not available now. The second is whether it is the sort of knowledge that goes stale. Some bodies of fact are perishable and must be renewed continuously, and there is nothing wrong with them, but a man should know when he is taking on a subscription rather than making a purchase. The knowledge of how men behave under pressure does not go stale. The knowledge of this year's arrangements very largely does. The third is whether you can get to the working part of it inside a year. A man who begins something that pays nothing for 6 years will not finish it, whatever he now believes about his own persistence, unless it is the central matter of his life. Most men are better served by 3 things learned to a working depth than by one begun grandly and abandoned in the second winter. And there is one more thing to say, less about choosing than about the manner of it. Learn it against a real piece of work, not in the abstract, and not by reading through a course of study to the end, and then looking for an application. Take the thing you actually intend to do, begin doing it badly, and learn what you need at the point where the doing stops, which is the point at which the knowledge means something, and is therefore retained without effort. A man who studies first and applies afterwards forgets 9/10 of it before the application arrives. A man who applies first and studies at the point of difficulty forgets almost nothing, because every fact he took in arrived attached to a problem, and a fact attached to a problem stays where it was put. The only quality that cannot be substituted for. If a man were permitted to keep one quality and to be stripped of every other, the one to keep is the habit of continuing after the interest has gone out of the thing. It is not a glamorous quality, and nobody has ever been admired for it while exercising it. It is admired afterwards, at a distance, under another name, and the name it is given is generally talent. Here is why it outranks the rest. Every other quality a man may possess is a quality he brings to the beginning. Ability shows at the beginning. Enthusiasm is highest at the beginning. Cleverness has its whole opportunity there, and nothing whatever is decided at the beginning, in any undertaking of any size, because a beginning is available to everybody and costs nothing. What is decided in the 11th month is decided by one thing only, which is whether the man is still at it. Now, I want to take away a false picture of what continuing looks like, because the false picture stops a great many men who are in fact perfectly capable of it. The picture is of a man gritting his teeth and pressing on through, by an effort of will, day after day, against his own inclination. That man exists and he does not last. And he does not last because will is a limited stock, and it is exhausted by exactly that sort of use. The man who actually continues looks quite different. He is not straining at all. He has arranged the thing so that continuing is the ordinary course, and stopping would require a decision, which is the exact reverse of how most men set up their affairs. He does it at the same hour, so that no daily choice arises. He does it in a quantity small enough that a bad week cannot break it. He does not require himself to feel anything about it, so that a flat month is not evidence of anything and does not start a debate. That is not will. It is arrangement, and arrangement is available to men who have no unusual reserves of anything. So when you hear that a man persisted for 9 years, do not picture 9 years of teeth gritting, which is beyond anybody. Picture instead a small, settled arrangement that was never disturbed, and a man who would have had to take a positive decision in order to stop, and who never happened to take one. How a man spends a day without choosing to. There is an accounting that almost no man keeps, and its absence costs him more than any financial carelessness ever will. He does not know where his hours go. Ask any man how he spent the last week, and he will give you an account, and the account will be sincere, and it will be wrong by a wide margin. Not because he is deceiving you, because the hours that go unnoticed are, by their nature, the ones he cannot report, and they are generally the larger part. A man will tell you he has no time to learn a thing that would alter his position, and he is entirely honest in saying it, and he has spent 11 hours in the last 7 days on matters he could not name this evening, if you offered him money for the list. Now, the instruction here is not to fill every hour, and I want to be clear about that because the counsel is generally given by men with an appetite for busyness which I do not share. Idleness that is chosen is not waste, and a man needs a good deal of it. The waste is the unchosen kind, the hours that were neither work nor rest but merely elapsed, and which leave a man tired without having refreshed him. Keep the account for 1 week. That is the whole of what I would ask. Write down, 4 or 5 times a day, what the last few hours went to, in as few words as will serve, with no attempt to improve the figures by improving the conduct. 2 things come of it, and both are of use. The first is that a man discovers he has more time than he supposed, and generally rather more than he wants to know about. Nearly every man doing this finds between 8 and 15 hours in a week that were not going anywhere in particular. The second is subtler and matters more. Once the account is kept, the spending changes on its own, without a resolution being made. A man who knows he will be writing the hour down at 4 o'clock spends it differently at 2:30, and he does not have to be lectured about discipline, and nothing has been required of him but the writing. That is the whole method, and it is not novel, and it was old when I first met it. It is merely never done, and the reason it is never done is that a man suspects what the account will show and would rather not have it in writing. The task you have been walking past. There is one more small matter, and it is the smallest of the evening. And of the practical things said tonight, it is the one I would put first, if only one were to be taken. There is a thing you have been walking past for some weeks. Every man has one. It is not large. It is a letter that must be written, or a conversation of about 10 minutes that will be uncomfortable, or a figure that must finally be looked at properly. It has been on the edge of your attention since the spring. It is not there because you are idle. It is there because it carries a small charge of unpleasantness, and every time it comes to mind, the mind slides off it onto something else, and the sliding is so quick and so practiced that you have never once caught yourself doing it. Here is what it is costing, and the cost is out of all proportion to the task. An unfinished thing does not sit quietly. It is present at odd hours, in a low way, without ever being examined. It arrives in the middle of the night attached to nothing. It takes a portion of a man's attention permanently and gives nothing back, and the portion it takes is the same portion he needs for good judgment and for patience with the people in his house. And it grows in the imagination in a manner it never grows in fact. The conversation that would have taken 10 minutes in April is now, in the mind, a matter of some size. It has not actually changed. Only the anticipation has been compounding, unattended, for 4 months. Nearly every man who has finally done such a thing reports the same 2 sentences afterwards. in the same order, that it took a fraction of the time he had allowed for it, and that the relief was out of all proportion to the size of what was done. I do not ask you to do it tonight, and nothing should be done tonight. I ask only that you name it before you sleep. Not solve it, and not plan it. Name it, so that it stops being a general unease and becomes one specific small task with a beginning and an end, since a named thing may be done on a Tuesday, and an unnamed one goes on collecting interest for years. The man who was working on something else. There is a fact about the telephone that is worth a few minutes tonight, and it is not the fact that is usually told. The man who brought it about was not a telegraph engineer looking for a better instrument. He was a teacher of the deaf. His mother could not hear, and neither could his wife. And the work of his life, before the wire and after it, was the human voice, and how it is produced, and how it might be carried to somebody who could not receive it in the ordinary way. The instrument came out of that. It came out of a man asking a question that belonged to an entirely different trade, and asking it for years, and asking it because of the people in his own house. Now, I do not offer that as a story about invention. I offer it because of what it says about where a man's material comes from. He was not searching for an opportunity. He was in possession of a question, and the question was not chosen for its commercial promise, and had no commercial promise about it at the time. It was simply the thing he could not put down. The men who accomplish the unexpected are very often in that position. They are not more ambitious than their neighbors, and frequently, they are less so. They are carrying a question that will not leave them alone, generally arising out of some plain circumstance of their own lives, and they carry it for long enough that it eventually opens onto something nobody could have planned for, which suggests a use for the small hours of a night like this one. What is the question you cannot put down? Not the ambition, which is a different article, and is usually borrowed from the men around you. The question. The thing you find yourself turning over when you are not required to think about anything, that arises out of your own house, and your own trade, and your own difficulty. Most men have one, and could not say what it is, because nobody has ever asked them, and they have assumed it to be of no importance, since it is not connected to their advancement. It is very often the most valuable thing they own. The boy who kept the book. There is another kind of beginning worth putting beside that one, because it is the opposite in every particular, and comes to as much. The man who built the largest fortune of the age began as a clerk keeping accounts, at 16, in a small office, at a wage of a few dollars a week. And from that first wage he did two things which he continued to do, without interruption, for the whole of his life. He wrote down what came in and what went out, in a small ledger, in his own hand, to the cent, and he gave a portion of it away before he spent any of it on himself. There was nothing visionary about either practice, and neither would impress anybody. He was not carrying a great question. He was a careful boy, in a dull position, doing two small things with such regularity that they became the fixed arrangements of his character before he was 20. I put the two beginnings side by side, because men reading of such lives conclude that a particular temperament is required, and then examine their own and find it absent. One of these men was carried by a question he could not put down. The other was carried by two small habits, kept without interruption, from the age of 16. There is no temperament common to the two of them, and any young man looking for the pattern would be looking for something that is not there. What is common is only this. In both cases, something was continued past the point at which it would have been reasonable to leave off, and in neither case did the man have any way of knowing, at the time, that it would come to anything. Take whichever of the two suits your make. If you are the sort who is held by a question, hold it and stop apologizing for its being unprofitable. If you are the sort who is steadied by a small daily practice, take one and keep it past the point where it becomes dull, which is where nearly all of them are dropped. Both roads have been walked to the end by men who were not remarkable at the outset, and neither road required the traveler to be the other sort of man. One thing to set down before you sleep. The hour is late, and I have no wish to hand you a program, since a program received at this hour is a burden rather than a help, and will be forgotten by breakfast. I will offer one small thing instead, and it will take a minute. Settle on the sentence you would like to be true about yourself in a year. One sentence. Not a list, and not an achievement with a figure attached to it, but a plain statement of the sort of man you would be. Say it in the present tense, as a fact rather than an intention, and say it quietly, and do not attempt to feel anything while you say it. The feeling is not required, and trying to produce it introduces a strain that defeats the whole object. Then let it go and sleep. That is the entire instruction, and I am aware how slight it looks against 3 hours of talk. Let me say why it is not slight. The mind that receives an instruction at this hour is not the same mind that argues with one at 11 in the morning. It does not weigh, it does not check the statement against the evidence, and it does not inquire whether you have any right to say such a thing about yourself. It accepts what is repeated, in the tone in which it is repeated, and it goes on working through the night, on whatever was handed to it last. Which means that the sentence you go to sleep on is not a small matter, and that most men are handing over the day's worst quarter of an hour without ever considering that they are handing over anything at all. You may as well hand it something you chose. Nothing about this requires belief. You are not asked to believe the sentence, and it is better if you make no attempt to. You are asked only to say it, and to say it again tomorrow night, and to let the repetition do the work that argument has never once done in the history of any man. What the morning is actually for. There is a companion to that, and it belongs to the other end of the night, and I mention it now because it will be more use to you in 6 hours than anything else said tonight. The first quarter of an hour after waking is not an ordinary quarter of an hour. A man in that state has not yet assembled himself. The defenses are not up, the day's arithmetic has not started, and whatever occupies him in those minutes goes in without inspection, in exactly the way the last minutes before sleep do. Most men give that quarter of an hour to the worst material available. They begin, before their feet are on the floor, with the list of what is difficult, the conversation they are dreading, the sum that does not come out. The tone of the day is set in those minutes by a mind that was never asked to set it, and is simply reaching for the nearest thing. I would not ask you to be cheerful in that quarter of an hour. Cheerfulness on demand at 6 in the morning is beyond most men, and the attempt produces only irritation. I would ask for something narrower. Give those minutes one thing, rather than the whole list. One matter, and preferably the one you intend to do first, held plainly and without any argument about your chances. That is all. Not a review of your circumstances, which is a task for the afternoon when a man has his faculties about him, and not an inventory of what is wrong, which is not a task for any hour. A man who does this for a few weeks will find that the day starts in a different place, and he will not be able to say what changed, and nothing will have changed except the material that was fed to an unguarded mind during the only 15 minutes of the day when it takes what it is given. The sentence you say without noticing. There is one more thing to leave with you, and it concerns ordinary speech, which is the least guarded of a man's activities and the most consequential. Listen tomorrow, for one day only, to the statements you make about yourself in company. Do not correct them. Do not resolve anything about them, only count. You will find that there are perhaps 5, and that they repeat, and that you have been saying them for years without ever once examining whether they are true. I am hopeless at that sort of thing. I have never been a patient man. I always leave it until the last minute. Money and I do not agree. Every one of them is offered lightly, as a small piece of self-knowledge, and generally with a certain warmth, since a man who admits a fault is agreeable company, and everybody present likes him for it. And every one of them is an instruction, repeated in public, several times a month, for a decade. There is nothing in the deeper part of a man that grades a statement by the seriousness with which it was offered. It does not know that you were being modest. It does not know that it was a way of putting a stranger at ease. It receives a repeated statement about who you are, and it sets to work making the statement good, because that is the whole of its function, and it has no other. So the instruction is not to make claims you do not believe, which is a strain and produces a man nobody can be comfortable with. It is only to stop making the 4 or 5 you have never examined. Say nothing in their place. A small silence where a habitual sentence used to go is not awkward, and nobody notices it but you. That is a smaller undertaking than anything else proposed tonight, and of everything I have said, it is the one most likely to alter a man's circumstances within the year, precisely because it costs nothing and requires no resolve, and may be done while tired. Nothing here has to be done at once. I want to close on a flat note rather than a rousing one, and to say something that is not usually said at the end of an evening of this kind. None of this has to be taken up at once, and a man who attempts all of it will do none of it. The material of the last 3 hours was not a course of instruction, and was never arranged as one. It was a number of separate matters, set down one after another, on the understanding that a man listening at this hour is not taking notes, and is not meant to. Some of it will have gone past you entirely. That is expected, and is no loss. 2 or 3 things will have caught, and they will not be the ones I would have chosen for you. And they were caught because they answered something that was already sitting in you before I said a word. Those are the ones to keep, and one of them is enough for a season. There is no order to any of it. Nothing said tonight depends on anything else said tonight, and a man who came in at the middle has missed nothing that the beginning would have supplied. And there is no hurry in the matter, though a great deal of instruction of this kind is delivered as though there were. The arrangements a man is living under took a number of years to set, and they are not going to be turned over in a night, and the attempt to turn them over in a night is itself one of the arrangements that keeps him where he is. A small thing, kept up, is the only method that has ever worked. It is unimpressive at the beginning, and it remains unimpressive for a considerable while, and it does not feel like progress at any point during the period in which it is working. So take the one thing that caught, and let the rest of it go, and do not lie there tonight making resolutions about your character. The room is quiet now. Nothing further is required of you this evening.